Do you want to go into yeah.
Like the old days. Right.
Hi, Jeff, you off mute and broadcasting and recording?
I'm not sure why, but we're having some type of an error with our webcam. So the people on Zoom should be able to hear us. Unfortunately, they won't be able to see. They can still see the screen share, just not the view of the room.
Okay, welcome everybody. Let's bring this meeting to order. This is the meeting of the City of Harbor Springs, Michigan Planning Commission. It's Thursday, June 19th, 2025, 5:30 p.m. local time. And we start with the roll call.
Bill Mulder,
Here.
Barry Lustgard,
Here.
Bob Buckner,
Here.
Kenny Stewart, here, Tony Johnson,
Here.
Chip Everest, here, Mark Bidet,
Here.
Annika Olanzi. We have a forum.
Great. Well, there's a procedural issue to take care of. And let me tell the Planning Commission where we are. Planning Commission has a member always from the City Council. And lately that was Michael Berman. When he resigned from the City Council, he was unable to continue to serve in any role. And so we do not have a City Council representative right now, an elected official. And charter says that we should have one, or we will have one. So one of our residents has gone deep on the Michigan Zoning Enabling Act and city charter and has said that we should not be able to meet or to act until City Council names a new rep. And they deferred doing that at their meeting on Monday night. They wanted to see if a person who fills the role of vacant council member, if they do name one, might be fit for the planning commission. So they deferred. So tonight we do not have a city council rep. And we have an opinion from the city attorney, and I'll read it to you. And then planning commission will tell me if you're comfortable with it, we'll proceed. If not, then we'll adjourn. But it's pretty clear. In conclusion, the city council's decision not to designate an ex officio member at the present time does not disqualify the planning commission from acting as long as the members present at the meeting satisfy the quorum requirements and follow the procedures outlined in the Michigan Planning Enabling Act and the bylaws of the city planning commission. So planning commission members, based on what you heard, are you comfortable that we're authorized to meet tonight? And
yeah, it's pretty clear.
okay.
I'll jump in. I think if Mike Berriman was still on council, still wasn't on the planning commission and was unavailable to attend the meeting, we would, if we still had quorum, we would be okay to meet. So I don't see that it's that different from that situation. So I'm very comfortable with continuing.
Okay. All right, then we're on. And the first thing on the agenda is the review of the minutes from the last two meetings. And those are May 15th and June 5th. Does anybody have any comments or corrections on those minutes? Okay. How about a motion to move things along?
I move we accept the minutes as presented.
I'll second.
Both
both meetings.
dates, correct. We have a motion and a second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Good. The minutes are approved. Next thing on the agenda is public comment or correspondence about any topic that's on tonight's agenda. And the things on tonight's agenda are public hearing on special land use request, review Article 10, red lines, and review Article 2 and 3, which is really dimensions within the zoning code. And then discuss what our upcoming meeting schedule should be from this point forward. So, knowing that, does anybody have any comments from the floor? Yes, ma'am. How's the sound in the room? Good. Okay, good.
Can you hear me? Okay. I'm Linda Rockwitz. I'm from 519 East Third Street here in Harbor Springs. I wanted to tell everybody how happy I am that there are so many here tonight. That makes such a great difference. Last summer, some of us in this room spent a lot of time and energy campaigning for or against the repeal of Ordinance 439. The yes team won, and the ordinance was repealed. Since then, we have been operating under the old 2005 ordinance that was in place. In the winter, the Planning Commission had 10 or 12 town hall meetings that to find what people, with a chance for everybody to say whatever they thought about anything really, but the zoning code and the zoning ordinance. The consensus from those meetings were that our RC had to go, that the code needed to be updated because of mainly, or a lot of it because of the archaic, close, but not that close, archaic language and graphs and things. So since then, Planning Commission has been meeting about every other week, going line by line through the code to see what we should do. All ideas and comments have been heard and discussed and considered. The articles that are remaining are the ones that probably are the most controversial. It seemed to me that a lot of what we did over the winter was pretty much boilerplate, statute, city or state law, that kind of thing. So now we're down to the nitty-gritty, and I'm glad to see so many of you because we need to do this together. Aaron Offield, who was one of the leaders of the Vote Yes Committee, and I, the chair of the Vote No Committee, have gotten to know each other over these months, these meetings, and found that there are things we can agree on. Mainly, that everyone should be heard. This decision, though you make the decision, we hope you will consider every idea, no matter who it comes from, no matter how they live, how long they've lived here, how long they live here, the amount of time they live here, or if they don't live here and they still love Harbor Springs. So the most important idea is that we have to move forward together. I urge all of us to put away the hard feelings and the grievances we had last summer. That's behind us. Together, let's create a zoning code that most everyone can support. That's the only way it's going to work. This little town is too important to be divided.
Thank you, Linda.
Aaron Offield, West Travis Township. Tonight, Linda and I invite City Hall, the council, Linda's friends and colleagues, art clubs, coffee groups, churches, students, seniors, everyone to stay at the table. I'd like to ask us to make a collective pledge to ensure both property owners and full-time residents hear that they matter and that we care for all of us. Zoning matters, and we ask full-time residents and the property owners who summer and winter in towns across the United States. We ask of those of you who treat Harbor Springs as your real home to participate in these zoning debates. All opinions matter. This campaign for me is a pledge about honoring our town's history of generosity. The full-time residents' engagement with property owners, we are one and the same. It's about an effort, a shared responsibility, and you each saying thank you to everyone who stayed engaged, even when it is hard. Let's build a zoning code that reflects all of us. It takes the right people, enough time, and a lot of care.
Thank you, Karen. I see Reed Romaine has his hand up on Zoom.
Yes, Reed Romaine at 125 East Summit Street. I have an open special use from an April meeting, and I was given the courtesy of extending that to the July 19th meeting, of which I accepted. Today, I turned in my response to Jeff Grimm. And I'm encouraging anyone that's part of the planning committee, to make a field visit at my house. I think it would probably help. Bob Buckner did, and I think that was a useful step that he made. So Jeff has my phone number if you want to give me a heads up, either text or call me, but I just wanted to give you a heads up that I am planning on attending the July 19th meeting, and encourage any planning commission member to make a field visit to our house.
Just a quick clarification, that meeting is on July 17th, I believe. And his revised application will be part of the package.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We have a Matt Gulseth on Zoom as well.
Go ahead, Matt, if you can hear us.
Yeah, can you guys hear me okay?
We can.
Yes. In the last meeting, there were a couple comments with regards to R2 versus R1 on Main Street. I live on 179 West Summit Street. I like to call that the above the bluff neighborhood. I biked around the city pretty regularly, and I guess one thing I'd like to mention, I don't see any, when I'm driving down Main Street, I have a hard time differentiating between the R1 and the R2 districts, our neighbors in those zones. And biking around the city, I think I see in plain sight lots of duplexes that don't look like duplexes. Particularly below Bluff, that's called the main area of Harbor Springs, the older part of Harbor Springs. I see a lot of classic duplexes or accessory dwelling units, wherever you want to call them, that were developed probably before the zoning code or before a lot of zoning code was set up. And I just encourage looking forward, when you're evaluating setbacks and limitations on lots, that you look below the bluff, you look at what's on 3rd Street and 4th Street, the areas behind and around the church. Those very walkable and let's call them compact or walking friendly neighborhoods are strong for a city. And I guess I'd like to see whatever setbacks are allowed below the bluff, that those setbacks are considered above Bluff Street in the neighborhoods I live in. I think there's a distinct characteristical difference between the way the city was developed, probably before zoning codes were put in place in the 40s and 50s. And I guess I'd ask the people that love Harbor Springs, do you think the neighborhoods below the bluff are charming? Do you think our neighbors on 3rd Street, on 4th Street, around the church, I view those as charming neighborhoods, and I'd like to have that type of charm above the bluff in the neighborhood I live in.
Matt, that likely is going to be the center of our conversation for the rest of the meeting. So if you can stick around, you can weigh in at that time. Okay, thanks. Yes, sir. Yeah.
My name is Gordon Andrews. this is my wife Candace. I live at 356 West Third Street. And we also own the adjacent property to that. And we would like to be able to combine those properties, but currently because of the property setbacks, side setbacks, we're unable to do so. From what I understand, the zoning code for side setbacks is 12% of the total distance or the total width of the property. And our existing home right now has an 8-foot setback, side setback. If we were to combine those two properties, it would be a total width of 104 feet, which 12%, that means it had to be 12 feet. And so we feel as homeowners that this is an unnecessary burden. We would like to be able to combine those properties. And so we would appreciate your time in discussing this. Certainly be happy to help out and, answer any kind of questions that you have. But I appreciate your time.
Good, that is one of the things that we'll be talking about specific. All right, any more non-agenda item? Darren?
See the red light? There we go. Good evening, Planning Commission, Darren Goppigan, Houston Road. Thank you for the opportunity to give input into our new zoning plan. As a member of Preservation 49740, I wanted to again stress our interest in historic preservation and the importance of maintaining the historic character of the city of Harbor Springs and its surrounding areas. I was forwarded a few questions that the Planning Commission Chair, Mr. Mulder, asked to solicit the best ideas and solutions from the community for the new zoning code. Thank you, Bill, for seeking our input. So the questions, are there undesirable aspects of the existing code that should be cared for? A key concern for maintaining our historic character and zoning that would permit future tall building constructions, most prominently on Main Street, but also in neighborhoods, is a concern for us. This is a complex and important issue, definitely deserving of thought and community input. Just know that it's on our radar and very important to us. What future needs of residents do you foresee? The ability for those future residents to enjoy the same quaint, small town that attracted you. Good zoning is the essential component that will ensure that reality. What ideas do you have for residents who want to create a multi-generational household? For communities, our community, ADUs, if done thoughtfully, may offer the potential for a viable solution when done in harmony and consistent with our historic architectural styles and designs. We should be careful, though, not to rubber stamp them with any sort of by right protection. ADUs would not be appropriate in all areas of the city. Proper setbacks and total lot square footage should obviously play a role. What types of living arrangements must make sense for the 43% of households that are comprised of a single person and aging too? I'm not sure that this is a problem needing a solution. If 43% of our households are made of singles, my guess is that those households or those property owners prefer that lifestyle. Not sure why we would or should use zoning to change or manipulate our demographics. Should we prioritize commercial agriculture over other uses? This is a good question, and I know it hits home with a lot of people in our city. Prioritize might be a bit powerful, but certainly some amount of deference should be given to our local farms. Keep in mind that once they're subdivided, there's almost no likelihood of them coming back. Are there any other ideas that we should consider? Yes, as a matter of fact. An historic commission that could offer input regarding potential demolition, reconfiguration of historic structures, as well as architectural style input on new construction in an effort to maintain a sympathetic character to our architectural history. We realize that such a commission or group would have no legal authority to direct, but could at least offer guidance. Bonus question, how can we retain year-round residents and possibly attract more? We've lost
about a third of our population, approximately 500 residents, since the 1970s, 80s, and 90s, or does this matter? First, the US Census reports a 23.3% drop, or 388 people from 1970 to 2020. So we went from 1662 to 1274, and only a 7.3% drop from 1970 to 1990 when we ended with 1540. That said, this is a recurring question that seems a bit odd to me. I'm not sure why this is a problem. We've been a resort community for over 100 years. We're a small town. We don't have the infrastructure to handle large growth, and adding that infrastructure would most likely change the fabric of the city. Again, going back to the key attribute that seems to attract most people, it's our Norman Rockwell small town atmosphere filled with historic homes, stores, and churches. Thank you for listening, and again, thank you, Bill, for posing these thoughtful questions.
Thank you. All right. Then why don't we move into our special land use request? And Jeff, do you want to set us up on this, or John?
1 second here to pull up the site plan here. So we have a special land use request for a property on Hoyt Street. It currently doesn't have an address because it's vacant. As soon as some type of construction starts, an address will be assigned. They're proposing a shop building. The reason that it's here for special land use above and beyond just normal site plan review is they are proposing to have some exterior storage on the site. And that requires that extra level of review process of planning. And the applicants are here today to go into more detail about what they'd like to do and why.
Okay, great. Now, we don't have to open a public hearing at this point, or should we?
We should.
We should, oh. Let's see, we have a motion to open a public hearing on the special land use request.
So moved.
Okay, we have a motion by Kenny. We have a second.
Second.
Second by Bob Buckner. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, public hearing is open, and are our applicants here? Would you like to give us an overview of your project?
Absolutely. Good evening, my name is Zach Jones with Wallstrom Dock and Dredge. My partner Andy is sitting over there as well. So the proposed new building on Hoyt that is directly next door to the Wallstrom Marine Storage Yard would operate as Wallstrom Dock and Dredge's permanent home base. The shop would be used for, storage of our equipment when not in use. And then we are asking for special land use as far as outdoor storage of completed dock sections. So we rent a lot downtown, which stores the majority of the dock sections that we put in and out every year for our clients. However, there is some overflow and those go up top. And so, while we try to keep that to a minimum, it is a necessary part of what we do. So we're asking you guys to consider that and to please, ask any questions you might have. But then approve so we can move forward with this build and get a permanent home in the city for the business. So, are there any questions I can answer?
Yeah,
Go ahead.
okay, just quickly, where is your current storage and workshop?
So currently we rent a field for storage downtown directly next door to Wallstrom Marine. Our current shop, we also rent from Wallstrom Marine that is inside of their current storage field directly next door to where we are. So part of this is we're not changing anything. We're kind of going to operate out of the same location, just right next door, which we feel will, not increase any traffic or anything going on Hoyt Street right there. And we're going to continue to rent the field downtown. So we're not increasing the amount of stuff we're taking uphill.
Thank you.
So a question for you. The topography out there is a bit challenging. There's a guardrail out there. Is the development that you're talking about specifically where the curb cut will occur? Is that going to be south of the guardrail and so you can actually get in there, or will you have to put fill in? How's that gonna work?
No, the proposed lot and that we own, is below, it's south of the guardrail. It's right at the bottom of the hill.
Okay, that's what I assumed, yeah. Okay, that should be fine. Oh, sorry, Chip.
Yeah, it's my understanding that there's a setback issue as well in terms of parking.
Yeah, the narrative indicated that they would allow or have if they had patrons that came to the shop, they would park in front. The zoning code does not allow that. It says no parking in the front yard setback. We did have a conversation before the meeting and they can park on the side or the rear of the building, no problem, and they've agreed to do that.
Perfect, thank you.
Any more questions for the applicant?
I have a question. What is the height of the building? Build?
Roof peak will be 24 feet 3 inches, I believe. In the engineered drawings as well, that were included.
And what's the height limit in that district?
35.
35, well within.
Yeah, well within.
Okay, thank you very much.
Very well.
All right.
I also do have another letter from our neighbor at Wallster Marine in support of the project that I was gonna pass out in addition to what you guys have currently.
Thank you.
Very welcome.
All right, stand by for more questions. All right, John Angeli, do you want to take us through your analysis?
Well, the analysis based on the section, as Jeff had mentioned, section 5173 allows for boat storage buildings as a principal use, permitted use, but because they are putting exterior storage outside, that requires special land use approval by the planning commission. And section 50.2100 has the special land use approval requirements, which I reviewed. The only one that they did not satisfy was the parking in the front apron, which they now have agreed to move to the side or the rear of the building if they have somebody visiting these. With that said, they met all of the criteria. The plan has been reviewed in terms of its site design, stormwater. They do have the application from the health department relative to the septic field. So they've met all of the site engineering standards in the site plan provision. I did include a proposed motion on page 4 of my staff report, but I would make some modifications to it based on the resulting conversation with the property owner. So I would recommend that if the planning commission does approve this special land use, that they include as a condition that they modify the site plan to remove parking from the front of the building, and that that would be the only condition as part of the SUP. But I'd like that on the record. And that's it, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Planning commission members, any thoughts?
Problem.
Right,
Seems pretty straightforward.
let's go to the audience then. Any comments from the public on this proposal? Anybody on Zoom that you can see, Jeff? I'll look as well.
No one currently has their hands up. We did receive 2 or 3 pieces of correspondence. I think we're part of the package that seem to be, I believe, in favor.
Okay. Then why don't we close the public hearing if someone would like to do that?
I'll make a motion to close the public hearing.
Mark today, and is there a second?
Second.
Here's a motion and a second to close the public hearing. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, public hearing is closed. Back to the planning commission. Just heard some affirmations. Any concerns at all, planning commission members?
No,
What do you think comes next?
I'm open. All right. I move that the planning commission approve the conditions, the special land use for 691 Hoyt Street for the construction of a building and parking lot subject to the following condition, and the following condition being that the parking be moved from the front to the side of the building.
Second.
There's a motion and a second to approve with conditions as stated. And we do a roll call vote.
Yes. Mark Bidet.
Yes.
Chip Everest.
Yes.
Tony Johnson.
Yes.
Kenny Stewart.
Yes.
Bob Buckner.
Yes.
Barry Leskar.
Yes.
Joel Mullen.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay.
All right.
Congrats.
Yes, very much.
You don't have to feel bad about leaving.
Go feed the dog.
Thank you.
Okay, let's, we're gonna move into zoning stuff now, because I think most people are here for. And, there was an item that was, raised last time about, Rob Cumming, the potential developer of the Bluff Gardens property. And a meeting, with Rob in December of 2023, I think it was. And, thought we'd say more about that. Jeff is going to give us an overview of his pre-application meeting process. That might provide some background.
Yeah, I'd like to be a little more broad than just talking about one specifically and just talking about pre-application meetings or pre-application conferences in general. It's been something that historically we have done. That actually it's not working right. It's 2 years. Historically, we've done pre-application meetings. We just never had a name for it. And it's something that in the new zoning code, we're actually kind of providing a little bit more guidance and showing that it's something that's available to the public to do. And that's in Article 8, specifically 8.5.1, where we talk about pre-application conferences. And I just want to provide a little bit of background. It's an opportunity for someone working on any type of a project that may not know what steps they need to go through or what documentation they might need to provide in order to do so. And they can come in and meet with me informally to have that discussion about what their project might entail, whether it's something that I can approve administratively, or if it needs to step up to the level of planning commission approval, such as a site plan or special land use like we just did, and walk through what that process will look like for them, what the time frame of it might be, what type of costs might be involved, and also what types of documentation they might need to provide for their site plan and what it will need to show in order to do that. Many times those meetings happen with no materials whatsoever. Sometimes they may be for very small projects, like somebody coming in just wanting to do a garage or a carriage house. Sometimes they might be for very large projects, and we've seen a couple of those, such as the Claridge Court condominium project that we just did this last year, or the Cottage Company's project down on the corner of Main Street and Gardner. And depending on the scope, there may be more people involved in that pre-application review. Sometimes it might just be myself. Sometimes it might be myself and John. And depending on if other boards or commissions may be involved, it may involve the city manager and potentially the chair for that board, depending on the scope of things. But again, at that time, there's no approvals or really review of an application going on at that time. So that's just something that I wanted to clarify, of what's happening at those meetings. There is another level that would then happen at the planning commission level that is open to public review, and that's a conceptual review. And that might be the next step, especially for a large project, where someone would now have some type of maybe artistic rendering or more substantial, documents that they would bring in and present to the planning commission, not necessarily looking for approval at that time, but looking to gauge the possibility of how successful that project might be, whether it's feasible, what types of things the planning commission is going to want to make sure that they look at when they're doing that review. And so that's just kind of a background on what those meetings are for and what their purposes are. And I guess my follow-up to that is there was a lot of questions about why the public felt like in that specific case, we were doing meetings behind closed doors. I just want to kind of caveat that that's all that it really was a pre-application meeting. And I probably do, let's say, between 5 to 10 of those each month, ranging in scale from talking to somebody about the possibility of putting in a deck to larger scale projects. So I guess a question that I have is this something that the Planning Commission feels that I should be bringing all of these pre-application meetings to your attention each month and providing you a list of, the meetings that I have? My concern in doing so, even though there is a pro of the community is much more aware of what's going on in the community, I think there are some significant cons. Mainly those two being, if someone in the community wants to talk and get questions answered about a project, but they're not ready for their neighbor to know that they want to build a deck or a garage or something, they may choose to not come in and talk to me for fear that that's going to become public knowledge. That also can then cause complications if they choose to not have that feedback from me, when then leading into just submitting an application. That application may have problems. It might throw their timeline off in trying to get those problems corrected. So I just want to throw that out there as some ideas for you to consider when moving forward, and what you of me and what I do for you.
Members, any reaction to that idea? Is that something we want to discuss at a future meeting? Some type of reporting, or are we satisfied with the process?
I'm actually currently satisfied with the process. I think that would be pretty onerous in the committee to hear about every meeting that Jeff had.
I'm in agreement with Chip because, being on the other side of the table from Jeff, representing clients and things like that, there's a lot of work that's done before anything ever becomes public. And there's reasons for that. And I think the system works well now. Nothing nefarious is being done. So I don't have a problem with this, maintaining the status quo, from a professional side.
I too think there's no need for reporting. I think you'd find that many of the projects would significantly change in scope, or maybe not even come to fruition from the time that you have a pre-application meeting. So I think there'd be some certain level of redundancy to that process. So I'm okay with the way things are.
Okay.
Satisfied with
Thank
the
you.
process.
All right. Any other? Let's go to the public.
So a couple points on this. I think the issue on the December issue wasn't this issue. There was an email from Victor saying the project might be going on. We can look at the zoning, and so there were conversations around it that coupled those. And so I think the people who are frustrated with that are more worried about that than the disclosure. And then it appeared like there were some changes in the planning process at that point that went on afterwards. So I think that's not settled yet and should be. In terms of notification, I will say in the case of where I sued the city, it related to the fact that I did in fact talk with people who were going to build a building. They told me that they would come to me and talk to me about it, and then maybe we could work it out. And then I never found out about it for another 4 months. And then the city got sued in part because of issues that could have been changed. And there were issues in that particular case, like the movement of the building that the yacht club was upset with, that also could have been changed ahead of time. So I think before you make this decision, you really got to include the thought of a good way to include design is to include the neighbors in that in terms of notification. And that notification can be simple in terms of it is publicly disclosable if they come and talk to the city no matter what. So that's the law, I believe. But then secondly, is it could just simply be reported that such a meeting went on. And if people are scared about being public, I don't know, they'll cope with it in some particular way, just as the people who are neighbors have to cope with the fact that it's being held from them when maybe there should be a conversation. And if we have engagement between each other before it ends up coming here, my guess is we're going to see a dramatic reduction. things like this.
I get that. I think I get all that. Do you think it's the city's role to reach out to neighbors, or is it the property owners?
Yeah, and I think, as I said before, and I'll write this up, I think the property owner should do it. I think the only city thing is just put it on the list, saying,
Okay.
just note it, just. Let me restate this. I think a simple way to do it is, if you're gonna build something, make sure you contact your neighbors, because 30% of the time projects go down in flames because the neighbors get upset. So that's just a fact that then warns somebody that they should contact their neighbors, and the planning process should simply be. Someone comes in and starts having a conversation, it goes on an Excel spreadsheet and it's published in your minutes. That type of meeting started, and then you don't have to do anything else. If someone doesn't want to read it, it's on you.
Okay, thank you. Lisa?
Yes, Lisa Nichols, 638 West Bluff Drive. When I was thinking about building on my property I'd had for about 20 years, and I'd never built a house before, it was really beneficial to sit down with Jeff for a little bit. And just like you said, kind of go over what my ideas were, kind of go over how I wanted to situate it, because of the way my property was zoned with the AG and the R1 A or B in the front. What was I gonna follow if my house went across both of them? Did I have to have half a house this way and half a house that way? So it was very beneficial. And he also told me what documents I would need. So when I was working with the builder, I could make sure, because he was from Petoskey, that he had those Harbor Springs documents that they needed. And I guess I didn't feel I needed to run around and tell my neighbors until I really decided what I was gonna build and the scope of it. I needed to tell them I'm gonna build something on this property that I've had for 20 years. So I think it was very beneficial, and I wouldn't necessarily want it to come to planning to say, well, she's thinking about building a house. I wonder if I decided not to. You know, I've gone, okay, this is a lot of work. I don't think I'm gonna do it, you know. So I think it was beneficial, but keep it in-house with Jeff until you got to the manor, then you're gonna submit actual plans.
Right, thank you. All right, so should we just keep this in mind and see if, you know, we have additional info that would make us change our process?
Yeah, I guess one other question would be, is it deemed to be a secret meeting, or can we be transparent about meetings that have happened? Because I mean, if we deny that a meeting has happened, then we have a problem.
I guess it's not that a meeting is secret, but if someone comes in and asks questions and no documents are provided, and then the meeting ends with just a discussion, how do you document whether a meeting has happened or not, unless you report it to the planning commission? So, you know, I wouldn't say that that's a secret meeting, but I'm not really also at this point advertising, hey, these meetings took place. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. It's just a matter of transparency and trying to be, you know, if someone says, was our meeting, we need to fess up and say, yes, there was a meeting. Just in the name of transparency, I don't know how we do it, you know, from a bureaucratic perspective, but I'm not for, I mean, I personally am not for hearing every meeting you have. I mean, I think it's bad precedent. So I don't know how we do it, but I can't really deny that we've had a meeting either, so.
It seems like this is nothing more than a conversation and nothing's been submitted. So my thought is that until things are submitted, it's a conversation.
I think that's one of my concerns as well, is if someone comes in and discusses and says, here's what I'm thinking about building. That plan may change 6 different times before I see it again. And if someone comes in and says, hey, Jeff, what did Chip just, you know, come in to talk to you about with his property? And I tell them, you may have completely changed your mind about what you actually wanted to build, but the rumor has started, Chip's gonna, you know, do something on his property. So I feel that the importance is that we really shouldn't be talking about and giving information out until it's information that has actually been submitted to us, such as a zoning application, a zoning permit, or whatever other type of document, because then This is what they've actually submitted to the city for approval. There's no questions about what it is, and we can provide them instead of my hearsay of here's why I talked to Chip about whatever he wanted to do. I can say, here's the plan that Chip submitted. And now it's available for the public to come in and review at any point in time.
Okay, I think we've covered that one. Good, thanks very much. All right, so here are our zoning code update goals. And we're gonna have this at the beginning of every meeting, so we all remember what our goals are as we work through some issues that sometimes aren't clear and simple. And I'll just read them because I'm sure the people online would really appreciate that. We're gonna sync with the city's master plan goals and future land use map. We're looking to improve clarity and usability for residents, staff, and professionals. We're looking to reduce bureaucratic processes and costs for residents. We're looking to provide more options for property owners and address potentially undesirable outcomes from the current zoning code. We also want to anticipate the future needs of Harbor Springs residents. Oh, still good?
And every time I'm gonna add, maintain Harbor Springs' special charm and character. I think it's a fair goal.
All right, and we also have another suggestion for a different goal. And that's to protect and preserve the rights and interests of current property owners. So let's go to Chip's suggestion first. Any reactions to that? And that was Chip for
Yeah, just, I've said it before, it's maintain Harbor Springs'
maintain.
special charm and character
Okay,
as we review the zoning code.
okay. I get it. How do people feel about that?
Yeah, I certainly understand where you're coming from, Chip. There is, obviously a lot of special charm and character in this town. It's the reason we're here, and I'm sure many of us are. However, what time frame do we preserve that special charm and character from? I'm sure the people in 1900s had a different view than they do today. So, do we want to have all wooden buildings with no paved roads, with no services or utilities? Or do we want to have, what we have today? That, at some point in time, the town had to evolve, and it still has to evolve to some degree. So I think while I truly respect your plan, I'm not sure that we really can do that, in my opinion.
Other thoughts?
Yeah, a couple, as with Tony, I absolutely understand what you're going for there. The question that I have is, number one, charm is in the eye of the beholder, right? So, what I think is charming might be completely repulsive to you. And the other thing is, it sounds like we're about to start legislating what buildings have to look like. And are we ready? Do we want to do that?
No.
Could it be something, not quite a goal, but a kind of a principle? Where we'd like make a decision, we can look at that as a factor, specifically.
Absolutely. I mean, it doesn't have to be a specific goal, but I just want everybody, in the commission at least, to continue, we need to maintain the charm and character of Harbor Springs. We're all here because of its charm and character, and I don't want to lose that in this process.
Totally agree.
So, I mean, that's what I'm totally, it could be an overarching principle, whatever you want to call it, but it needs to be always considered.
I'd be willing to bet that 100% of the members of this committee completely support that. It's just a question of, as Tony asks, how do you do it? How do you accomplish it?
All right, well, let's make a mental note to kind of judge some of the decisions we're making based on that characteristic.
Okay.
And then we can all say, that's charming, no, that looks like hell.
That's fine.
Okay, so we have a good discussion on that.
Sure.
Then the other one is protect and preserve the rights and interests of current property owners. Does that rise to the level of a goal, or? And is that valid?
Well, that's sort of implying that we're not. At this point doing that. I mean, I believe that's one of our, it has always has been one of the goals of this committee to protect the rights of property owners. And I don't think we've ever not done that. So I don't really understand why that would also become a goal. I could be wrong, but you know, I just feel like we've always have done that.
Well, the last couple of meetings, we have talked a lot about property rights, and we actually made a decision to retain a zoning district in order to preserve the existing property rights of people in that district. So
I think to some extent, you know, I agree with Mark. That's kind of what we're trying to accomplish in developing a zoning code, is to preserve and protect the rights of property.
you know, I see that as another principle we could have.
Yeah.
Building on the last two meetings. There is a possible fix though. We're supposed to be deciding on on policies that are best for the community. There could come a time where some of us would say, you know, what's best for the community is such and such. And somebody's existing property right might not sync with that. So I just want to caution us that thinking for the whole of the community, we might not be able to hit that mark every single time. But I'm willing to try. Willing to try. All right, so it sounds like we just came up with a couple more principles or tests or some of the ideas that we've got. And we got those locked in. Thank you. Yeah, Karen.
Hi, Karen Ockfield. So it was a friend of ours that brought you that second idea about the protection and preserving. Because when we went back to the zoning code update goals, this is from the layout of the repealed zoning 439. And so this list.
Well, this does not appear in the zoning, any version.
Well, it's something that I found from a long time ago. So it may not have, I don't want to split hairs right this minute. However, what we didn't see in here was a place where it was something new, something, you know, something that we added with this idea of what we're trying to do with our preserving and protecting. And so it would be great if you could consider all those things. It did come from a woman who contributed it. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I think it was a good thing to talk about and add as a principle specifically. Karen.
Bill, just a quick comment, and thank you, Chip, for talking about the charm. And I think to Bob and Tony's concern, you're right, you can't legislate it, but this gets back to the point I was making. You certainly can, by zoning, say, you know what? If we tore down Gurney's and put a 4-story apartment building there, it's not gonna keep the charm of the town. So by zoning, you can preserve and protect the historic charm. And you can give, and this is where I was saying a historic commission would be helpful, you can give guidance to developers. Developers may be okay with a certain style. A Richard Meyer type building downtown probably is not compatible with how our town currently is. And that guidance, though not legislated, could at least steer them. But the zoning, like I said, 4-story apartment building where Gurney's is not going to be sympathetic to the charm of the town.
There was a lot of last summer about misinformation. Can we stop talking about 4-story buildings downtown?
I'm just using that as an example, Tony, not. But it's part of what you can do is zoning, is what I'm saying. I'm not saying you're doing it, I'm just saying.
Those examples creates the fear mongering that we dealt with last year.
Okay, whatever you want, doing something that's not sympathetic is something you can do by zoning, that's all I'm saying. So you can do what Chip's saying, it just may be a little more subtle.
Okay, looks like Reed Romaine has his hand up. Reed, are you there?
Hear me?
Yes.
Okay, when on my special use request from April, a lot of time was spent on the appearance of our ADU that we had proposed. So when I prepared my response that I gave Jeff today, my wife Georgianne thought it was kind of silly because I had this several pages that I called examples of Harbor Springs newer homes. And then I said, what does it mean? Size and character, that it will be in harmony with the appropriate and orderly development of surrounding neighborhood and or vicinity. So what I did is I gave photos of homes that I call newer builds. And it becomes a real problem when we talk about historical Harbor Springs, when you go down Main Street and see those old beautiful homes, or if you go on East Bluff, the legacy homes. But as homes are being raised and new ones are being built, and this can happen anywhere, even in Summit Street. And, you're seeing ranch homes with steel roofs, homes that, it becomes really modern homes in general, and then homes that are very classic looking. And it becomes, of course, it becomes even more of an issue with an ADU if you have a home that's not a historical home. But so that's what, so I'm sort of, that's a problem for me right now because so many comments, so much time was spent on what our ADU should look like. And, if I could, I would move my grandparents' home to Harbor Springs on 1810 Lone Road in Freeland, Michigan, an old, it was a farmer's house that happened to be a craftsman style house, which was really out of ordinary back then. But, we just don't have all those in Harbor Springs. So, I always joked I'd like to be the god of taste, like anybody might want to be, but it's, that's going to be a real challenge. And that's all I want to say. And I've been really troubled with this because of, personally with the ADU. So even though I might come up with a ADU that's in, classic, at least in my mind, classic, someone else will say, well, that's garbage. So, it's going to be difficult. I think that's all, that's all I'm trying to say, but I did address it in my, my response for the, my special use request.
Thank you, Reed.
Yeah.
Okay. Good. Well, we got two new principles that we specifically named now, and we'll see if we use those tonight. Okay, let's move into red lines, Article 10. There's some land development options. And this is the topic we tabled last meeting. The attorney has made some recommendations on here. Those are in blue. Does anybody have any comments? One of the bigger changes, which is really administrative, is Jim said that the planning commission is not responsible for preparing something called a finding of fact, that based on his reading of the Michigan statutes and such, that city council actually has to prepare a finding of fact. So we provide a recommendation to city council, and they will type up something that says finding of fact. And then incorporate a lot of our recommendation into it. So that's what that's all about.
I have a comment later in the article, whenever you're ready.
Is it about condo hotel development or is it?
Yeah.
Okay, let's hold that for a minute.
Okay.
All right, any concerns or questions about the city attorney's recommendations?
I'm good with it. Yeah, I support it.
All right, let's go to the public. Anybody have any thoughts on this? John Wayman.
If you don't mind, I will troops to everyone. Jonathan Wayman, 483 East Third Street. When I read through the zoning code, to me, the Achilles heel of the entire zoning code is Article 10. Thank you, by the way, for allowing me to talk to the city attorney about the use of the word sold. And you notice he adopted my comment in connection with narrowing the ability of the developer to push the envelope. And I think, as I've heard everybody tonight, the whole issue that you face is pushing the envelope. Everybody, including the probably more importantly, wants to push envelope to be able to maximize whatever they see in the property, whether it be profit or something that's appealing. In any event, as I've read through this, and I'd ask you, this is probably coming kind of a little bit late. I still see holes from the perspective of a litigator, where if a developer decides it's worth it to attack it, and they want something that is contrary to the master plan, will they be able to get by the which, as I indicated, is what I see as the real character changing potential. And if you'd be kind enough, I'd like to meet with this with the consultant who's provided this to you and shadow box with him where I see the vulnerability. And it's not something that I can go through right now because it's kind of detailed and boring. So if you would grant me the opportunity to sit down and chat with him. I know he's been asked, it's never been challenged before, but I can't tell you how many times you hear about that same kind of position when it's litigated and it turns out that in fact, what turned out to be not a problem turned out to be a problem. So if you would, I'd like to meet with this gentleman and ask you to table it for another 2 weeks or so.
Planning Commission, what are your thoughts on this?
I enjoy shadow boxing with attorneys.
I love shadow boxing with experts.
Yes, I don't have a real sense of the exposure that we may or may not have. But what's 2 weeks hurt us?
Yeah, well, city attorney feels comfortable with this.
Yeah, that's true.
Any other thoughts?
I'd like to hear John's thoughts, actually. Yeah,
I think one of John's concerns is the consistency with the PD application with the master plan. And I think a couple of meetings ago during our review of qualifying standards, we elevated the consistency of the master plan as one of the 5 qualifying standards. So it has to be consistent and promote the goals of the master plan, even to be qualified for further review. So we move that premise up to the forefront. So I think, and that's what I would discuss with Mr. Whalen, was that I think his concern has been addressed because we did move it as one of the top 5 concerns that has to be qualified. So, and I think doing so, I think Mr. Raymer agreed that it puts it in a whole different light. So I think that's why the city attorney is comfortable with the way that the redrafting of the article is done.
Yeah, I have a suggestion. Once we finish going through it, to make sure that we're all comfortable with the changes that have been made, my suggestion is to respect the city attorney, and we should decide whether we call it done or not. Now, by done, it's not going to be submitted to the city council for a long time. So I'd also suggest that the 2 of them enjoy shadow boxing and propose a brief of what the key issues are that they discussed. And then we decide if we want to revisit Article 10 at that point or not. We can call it good for tonight as long as we're comfortable with the wording. That's my suggestion.
Great, and you know, everything we've decided so far is still open to revision as we learn more things, and you know, this would be too.
Makes sense.
All right, so we're gonna call it done.
Mr. Chair,
Done for
may I
tonight.
add, I think maybe Jeff can help me out on this. When we met with Mr. Raymer, I think there was different opinions on section 10.5, the condo hotel.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
I think a couple of us feel that it's no longer really needed in the code, and I think the planning commission needs to make a decision on that. Jeff, did I get that right? I mean,
Yeah, I think that there's, you know, I think it overlaps greatly with language that we have elsewhere in the code already. There are certainly some things that are very specific and very weird, and how would we even really, you know, get involved in the, you know, administration of that? Like verifying, I think there's some language in there about electronic key cards and that they're changed out every so often. I mean, that's a pretty high level of city involvement in a private business. And realistically, there's other aspects. If somebody wanted to do some type of a condo hotel, we would already be going through a process of approval under any of these other sections. I think we kind of, many of us agreed that having a specific section just for condo hotel development seems excessive, and that other areas can cover that.
I have a question. I thought my memory is good. I thought we took it out. We decided to take it out. And my question is, did the city attorney think it should be put back in, or why is it that?
to be honest with you, I think Jeff, myself, I think Bill, you were in the conversation in city attorney. I think it was 3-1. And I think the city attorney was kind of advocating to keep it in. Whereas we were saying there's enough provisions both in the current code and or the proposed code and state statute relative to condominium that we don't need to have a condominium hotel. And the other part of it is when you put something in the code, then it's Jeff's responsibility to administer it. And like he's saying, they have to change the key cards every day. Is he gonna be at the building every day to manage that? There's other provisions in here about having somebody at the front desk maintaining and managing the pool. I mean,
So it should
this,
afford nothing.
I think this, I don't want Harbor Springs to take this wrong, but this is a Harbor Springs code provision that I've never seen in any other ordinance. It had to be specifically written to manage a proposed project that may have happened in the desert. So this was a preemptive article, okay, that no longer is needed, in my opinion.
I don't want to speak for Jim. You know, but I think the gist of his discussion was that at some point in time, we felt it necessary to add this language to our code. And that now that it's there, why remove it? Again, I don't want to speak for Jim though. But that does.
I read this and it's really kind of interesting that Jeff is going to have to make sure, it says a husband and wife shall be deemed as one natural person. How is he gonna manage that? I mean, this is a very onerous order. We took it for the zoning administrator.
Okay.
My recommendation is 10.5 comes out.
Okay.
If we do choose to keep it, I think I have a version where I've gutted a lot of that overly onerous requirements such as key cards and whatnot. And I would suggest that if we choose to keep it, that we look at that as a potential replacement.
Well, let's see if people concur that we should just strike the whole thing again. Let's see some nods. Yes, okay. I say let's strike the whole thing and let's book it as a win for reduced bureaucratic processes and costs for residents. while keeping the charm.
I want to see you.
Yeah, check marriage license. Okay. So the planning commission says strike it again. Other than that, are we good to call this done for the night?
Yes.
Good by me.
Great. Okay. I think we're down to it now. So we can take a look at Articles 2 and 3 and my recommendation and proposal tonight for the planning commission is that we focus only on dimensions. And don't worry about uses yet. We've got next meeting or the meeting after that to work on that too. And a couple of residents pointed out that there was some good work done by Beckett and Rader early on to put this part of the old zoning code into the new format. And that was very useful. And I used it and extracted the information on the worksheets that were in the pack. So I think I was able to take it to a level farther than using those old pages by combining these into a one-page worksheet for each zoning district. Do people feel okay with this tool and this approach?
Yes.
Okay. And maybe talk about dimensions. All right, this is what we've been waiting for months, building up to it. We also have a construct about the zoning districts that we think we're going to have, but this is one of the tests, so we'll see if it still makes sense based on the dimensions that we decide. All right. We take a couple layups first.
I think so.
Yeah.
Review these, maybe. All right. Back of your, let's go to manufacturing. And we decided that we're gonna change the name to industrial in the new zoning code. Everything I see on here is, it was the same in current code versus the repeal. Other than a slight difference in the max building height.
So Bill, actually, if you go to the current code, 50.1704, item 5, I think it actually says 2 stories, 35 feet.
In the current
code.
Okay.
I might be wrong about that, but.
All right, who wants to start the bidding?
Let me throw out something for you, if you don't mind.
All right.
I think at one point we had a discussion, it might have just been staff, but there could be potential issues by listing a maximum height and a maximum story. And that it might be better to simply state a maximum height and ignore stories, and they'll fit within that height with what the building department says that they can fit.
Great.
I like that.
Yeah.
Okay. Tony,
That would have impacted the last thing we just proved, right? They don't have 2 stories, they just have a 24-foot building. Yeah.
Tony, you want to start us out with what you would do here?
To me, it looks like we pretty much just carry over from current ordinance 440.
And change it to 35 feet?
35 feet, yes. Which, from what Bob was saying, is the current ordinance.
It is the current, yeah. I'm looking at it right now.
Great.
So no regard to average building height.
Correct.
Okay, I agree with you.
All right. We have agreement on that?
Yes.
All right. Garen?
Just a quick comment, Bill, on the qualifier. I like the 35 feet, by the way. Does that include HVAC and decks? Is that the max height, including everything on the building? And if not, can we agree on that?
Great.
I believe in most of our zoning districts historically, that has included everything except for some small details, like I think like chimneys, because the building department requires those to be higher than the peak. The only district where we have different language is in the central business district, and we can discuss that when we get to that
We
one.
are gonna get to it.
But I
So,
believe,
yeah, does anybody have a preference here about including mechanical items or not including? Mechanical? Jeff, how would you enforce the current code today? On that issue?
with the current code just says maximum building height, and I don't think there's any exception for mechanical equipment. So it would just need to be included in their site plan review and making sure that it complies with that 35-foot height.
So that's the way you would interpret it.
Well, if there's an interpretation issue here, wouldn't it be an opportunity to clean that up? Say, including or excluding, and then list what's included or excluded, or
I think Kenny's taking a look at the code. There is in the general provisions, there is a qualification relative to exceptions to height. And I think he's looking for it.
I've got a definition here that was in your document that was the repealed code, but I'll say it because I've got it here. Building height in feet. It's defined as the vertical distance measured from the existing grade at the building wall to the highest measurable point on a building based on roof design.
correct?
So if I have an elevator shaft going above that, then that's okay. Is that what that says?
I say the code. We've already went over it.
Okay, while you're looking at that, why don't we talk about the other items? We could pretty much carry forward from the current code then?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Under, because we've already been through this section, under section 5.22 in the code, the proposed code. Says the following structural appurtenances shall be permitted to exceed the height limitations of the district for which it's located. Mechanical items such as chimney, HVAC, solar panels in the CBD and the B1 districts. Of course, we took those districts out, but mechanical items, chimneys, HVAC can exceed the height limitations of the district. So structural extensions deemed necessary for appropriate building designs, such as cornices or parapet walls that may extend to a maximum of 42 inches above the height limitations of the district and shall have no openings. So there are some exceptions to the height depending on what district you're in. And primarily that's in the central business district. So I just wanted to let you know that in the general exceptions section that we've already been through, there are some exceptions to the height.
But just in the CBD or?
It's in the districts that you would determine. I think the districts that were in the repealed code were only in the business districts, not in the residential.
That's correct. Specifically CBD and B1.
B1, yeah. Yes.
Anybody have any thoughts or include this district as well, or don't include this district with those exceptions?
Typically in your central business district, and if you take a look at the buildings downtown or in other downtowns, they may have mechanical equipment that's on the roof. But what the ordinance also provides is that the mechanical equipment is screened by a parapet wall, which can be no higher than 42 inches. And usually it's set back from the main part of the building. So there's like a screening around all the HVAC and mechanical equipment, so you really can't see it. That's the exception.
So the question is, do we have a problem with that?
Yeah.
With the industrial or an industrial building?
Yeah, if this is, we're talking industrial area.
That's
Yeah,
it.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, I have no issue with it.
Okay, either.
Yes, sir.
Philip Lauren, Hill Road. It seems to me like there might be some use in matching the language that the county uses, which is, if I remember correctly, the distance between the average grade and the average height of the roof, between the eave and the peak for like gable and hip roofs and stuff like that. We don't have any provisions in there about the average grade, and obviously grade changes, and so matching the language with what the county uses, it's like it would make a lot easier for people.
What do you do?
Yeah, we do have that in the code, which was in the back, section 15, which was the graphic illustrations. Has exactly what that gentleman was talking about relative to average grade to the midpoint between the eave and the top of the roof.
The use of average height in the past came up a little bit previously. Average height is not a totally clear calculation.
Yes, I think we're agreeing to strike that on this.
Oh, you are gonna say.
Yeah. Yep. For that reason. All right, I think we got one.
We're also moving into stories.
Yeah,
35
moving
feet.
up to 35 feet, that's it.
But okay to have
Air conditioning.
air conditioning stuff. Okay.
Yep. All right, why don't we go to community? So, for those following along, the community district includes things like schools and city buildings and some of our parks and conservancy properties. And the dimensions in the current code and the repealed code were the same. Although I do see here, we have stories, and if we're in the mood to remove stories, we could do that. Unless John and Jeff tell us there's a reason.
I think you go with like, just make it
Height,
standard.
max height, that's it. Okay.
We like 40, instead of 40 feet, instead of 35 feet.
Yeah,
Why is it?
I don't know where that came from. You know, it includes a school, I guess.
Is there a building that's over 35 feet now?
So the school is taller than 35. I would guess Old City Hall is taller than 35. There's a few of them out there. I'm not sure why that height was picked. But it's been there for a while.
We can make it 35 if you want to for consistency.
Yep.
35 works, Mark?
Yeah, if you just think about the levels and storage and the areas needed, 35 is a
Okay.
good number. 40 makes it a little bit easier on the designers, but 35 works.
And plus room for air conditioners on top of that, or whatever.
Yeah, they're additional.
Yeah,
That's
that'd
really-
be okay. in
That's
this-
really standard, you know.
In this district, that'd be fine.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and you know, for commercial buildings, that's really standard because a lot of commercial buildings, they have rooftop units. You know, that's super standard and that's the most efficient way to heat and cool commercial buildings. So that's why you see them everywhere. Standard.
And that'll fit the needs of future schools or.
Probably. Yeah, I'm just guessing.
Right.
Or
40 is better. Like I said, 40 makes it easier. You could go with 35.
So it feels pretty good, just.
I
duplicate
thought
what we've got.
if they kind of redo Blackbird or another school, will fit the needs of the community.
Yeah, well, they'll come and talk to us and we could decide if we could modify the zoning code or not, or.
Yeah, and a lot of those types of structures, public buildings, they tend to be single story.
Right.
You know, and they can also play a game using mezzanines and things like that to, you know, avoid ADA.
Okay. Yeah.
There was an issue not too long ago with the school with cell towers. So where does that fall in with the
Yeah.
exception?
Good question. As I recall, well, let's go right to the expert.
If I could chime in, schools are not subject to local zoning. Most frequently, the school will reach out to us and provide us with an idea of what they're doing and ask for feedback, which we generally offer thoughts. Usually the school will work with us, but at the end of the day, the school gets to do what the school wants to do.
Okay, so because it really doesn't matter about the height and accommodating the school, they'll do what they want to do.
So 35 feet then.
Oh.
Yeah, 35.
Could we get your name, ma'am? We get your name
Gretchen Pretty?
and from East Bluff, right? For the record. Okay,
35 feet.
35 feet.
No stories.
And no stories. How about water? You up for that?
Sure.
Okay. Now, remember, we have waterfront and we have waterfront one in today's world, and what we decided is that waterfront one, we're gonna try to eliminate because it just contained a few boathouses. And we think that we could put those in some residential zoning district to be determined. So what we're talking about is waterfront, and Jeff, can you remind everybody what's in the waterfront district all about?
So a reminder, this is waterfront for the commercial properties that are along the waterfront. So,
yes,
you want a list of what properties?
no,
or-
just, what's it all about and why do we have it?
Well, I mean, it's a zoning district, we wanted to have specific rules related to the properties along the water. I think a couple of key components here that differ from some of our other zoning districts. Is we've noted it in previous plans about preservation of views. And so there's some language in here, both in building height and in lot coverage that goes to trying to preserve those views. Specifically in our maximum lot coverage, we get into making sure that not more than 60% of the width of the property is encumbered by buildings to help make sure that there are view corridors between those buildings as the public is using the sidewalk and the streets to be able to, maintain that view of the water. This is the section where we did have previously an averaging of maximum roof heights. There was some language in the old code about stepping of roofs to try and break up, so we didn't just have block buildings. And so that's where averaging of roofs could come into play. If we're going to keep any language like that, I believe we did have some suggestions about how to clean up and define how we would calculate that a little better to make sure that we have less issues moving forward. Just so it's more clear, easily clarified to anybody.
And that's in the maximum lot coverage wording?
So there's language in the maximum lot coverage that talks about 60% of the width of the property.
Yes.
And so we did modify that language slightly to make it a little bit easier to interpret and more clear on how that would be calculated should there be a concern.
That's adding the part about the right of way, that's where it's measured.
Yeah, defining more how we measure it specifically. There's the height of the building is a separate thing down in maximum height, where we list that, the average height of the building shall not exceed 30. But if they do what's, the stepping of roofs idea, that the average could be, or the maximum would be 33 with the average 30. Getting it right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
If we're going to keep that language, I think one thing that may be a good idea is we don't specify what direction the roofs should be stepped in. I think that the idea, and correct me if I'm wrong, I wasn't here when this language was created. I think that the idea was in the realm of protecting views and stepping of the roofs of the view of that property to break up just an outline of the building. However, there's no language in the code that talks about that at all. So I believe that the intent was possibly to step like side to side as you would be looking at it. But in reality, the way it's worded, someone could step front to back. So you're still seeing just a square silhouette. So if we wanted to keep something along this, I might suggest, or at least we have a discussion, if it would be worthwhile to specify something about that, if they should be stepped along the width of the property as opposed to the depth. Or if we don't think that that's needed and it's still doing what it's intended to do.
I have a question. Is the stepping of, you have multiple buildings on the site. So is the stepping a requirement or is it simply allowable with those dimensions? Could I build 3 buildings at 30 feet each?
You could absolutely just skip the averaging and just go with I believe there is a separate thing listed in the existing code of here's your max height. If you wanted, and I believe that max height is 30. But then I believe that there's the language that says you could have portions as high as 33 if you're going to then do the stepping, and then the average would be 30, and then, but, you know.
Okay, thank you.
There's one.
Yeah.
Complicated.
Yeah, that's good. Mark, would they?
It's seven.
One
But
person.
I think I might be missing something here, I probably am. The width, it says is measured perpendicular to the right of way. Should it be parallel to the right of way? Or the depth, because we're worried about the width, 60% of the width of the lot, not the depth of the lot. You're talking about the road right of way, I think we discussed this before, I just, you know,
It does seem like that should be parallel.
It does, yeah.
doesn't it?
John, do you have a?
Parallel, should be parallel, I think.
Yeah.
Okay.
It says there is more than one building. It might need to be just changed to if.
Oh, yeah.
That could be my type. All right, why don't we go line by line? Let's just plunk in some numbers and see how we feel. All right, minimum lot width. 100. 100. Minimum lot area, stay with 10,000.
Yep.
Minimum, maximum lot coverage, sounds like we're gonna change perpendicular to parallel. And correct that typo. Okay, so for the principal building in the lot, front setback is 25 feet in today's code. What would you like it to be?
25.
Side setback is 5 feet in today's code. What would you like it to be?
From my perspective, none of this changes, so 5 feet.
That shortcuts it, okay. Everybody good with that? All right. Then max height. What are you thinking?
I guess I have a question. Is the juice worth the squeeze for 3 feet? I mean, it just.
The complexity?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well said. I understand the need for views though.
Does that roof line make that big of a difference?
It could to someone.
It's actually difficult to work with. It's quite candid. I'm trying to work with that 33 feet. You know, with better definitions, it's easier. But it's almost like I'm thinking, you know, 30 is pretty nice. Or we make it the same measure as everything else at 35. And just straight and clean, same definitions, no messing around. Leave it up to the owners and their designers to determine what they want the building to look like. You know, as far as breaking up the massing and all that, it's a hard thing to lose. It's clunky. I would agree with that.
Yeah.
So it sounds like we're in favor of simplification.
Carter.
Carter.
Bring up this point, so. Again, how you calculate that average, so the building, Irish building is 33 along with higher ridge line. Normal to the front of the street, whereas the Wallstrom building is 33 feet, but because it's slanted, and so when that was taken to planning commission, the average was calculated based on the planar average instead of the visual average, if you do a projection, so the different ways to do it, but I think it would have been nicer to have that roof line the other way and would have not caused trouble at the time. But the way it's written right now is you can run 33 feet all the way along the street facing side, which I think is not what it's meant to have. Because you block view and you obstruct the water.
Well, it sounds like we're coalescing around simplifying and just picking one height, one maximum height. And the question is, what is that height?
I like lower because of the views.
There's also a normality of that, like do a projection, is it slanted normal to the street or is it slanted normal to the edge level? You want to, you're looking at the water, you want it looking like this, you don't want to.
Right.
The gable.
30 feet.
I like that. I like 30. Just like clean 30 feet.
Yeah.
30 feet.
stop it there.
Tony, Kenny, what are you thinking?
I can support 30 feet.
So if we change to 30, then Irish Boat Shop is out of compliance.
Nope.
They're grandfathered
Grandfathered.
grandfathered in.
Existing non-conformity.
Existing
Yeah,
non-conformity.
and
That's
existing
the one.
non-conformities are, they're able to be maintained, they're able, they can keep them up, they can do work to them. They just wouldn't be able to tear the building down and rebuild it to that same standard. They would have, if they remove the building, they would then have to comply with the new rules.
Thank you. I'd go for 30 with the rest of the group.
Were you gonna say something, Dan, or?
Yeah, I was just gonna add that I did check it should be perpendicular relative to maximum lot coverage. Not parallel.
Perpendicular to the street. Okay,
If the cube is at an angle that
Right.
maximizes the width, so that's the idea.
okay.
That's how we measure, it's perpendicular. If the building is.
You guys say, all right, sounds like just settled on 30 feet maximum height, no funny business with air reviews.
Kathy Marshall, live on Sergeant Street. I'm just confused. Are we talking about residential or commercial here?
The waterfront district.
It's commercial.
It's all
Commercial properties.
All right.
Trying to think of the height of an average boat in a showroom. That's my only question.
They fit in at 30 feet, that's fine.
Okay.
How about setbacks all? Current code says 25.5, 25.25.
Good.
So, Bill, in the current code, there is a maximum height of 16 feet for, I can't even read my own writing, beaches and boathouses, 1 story.
One district.
It was the WF1, right?
I don't know if it was.
Is that commercial?
It was in the, in this this chapter or article. I'll try and find it.
I think that's when we were talking about waterfront one.
There's, I think that might be in the regular waterfront district. They're one of the permitted uses. I'm not looking at it right now, so forgive me if I get some of the language incorrect, but I think there's one of the permitted uses are residential day houses or something along that
Right,
line.
that's
Basically kind of a house that doesn't have, let's say, a kitchen and a bedroom.
Right.
But something that would just be used for the day. I think there's only maybe one actually in existence in that zoning district. And I think it has some specific regulations to it.
It does. And so the question is, do we address that here?
I guess if you would like to see a continuance or the ability for new day houses to be built, and you feel that you need to have different setbacks or story heights to them, then you would want to address that.
Or Bob, are those gonna be moved to the residential district?
I suppose they could. There's 16 feet.
Well, let me give you the example, and this is probably in here for this one specific property. There's the, I think Graham and Dr. Pierce have that small little day house with a little marina in front of it. That's switched there between Wallstrom and Irish. And yeah, thank you, Irish Report. I think it's there for that specific site. So if we feel that we need to keep language for that, or just let that be another example of an existing non-conformity, however you would like to.
I don't personally think we need it. It just, I bring it up because when I was reading it, it specifically says maximum building height shall be 1 story and shall not exceed 16 feet. And that's the one. I mean, if we're talking one house, no, I don't think.
Day house.
Yeah, the day house.
One day house.
One day house.
Then what could happen with that property?
I don't know.
I mean, what category does it fall into? Because we get rid of that, it's gotta go somewhere.
Well,
Is it, is general waterfront residential then? Gonna go to those lines. Sort of isolated because it's just by itself. It's next to.
Right,
Community.
right.
It's next to waterfront, next to Wallstrom's.
Yeah.
So
Looking
is it
for
spot
my cheap
zoning to make it some other district?
It's commercial.
Yeah, it's a commercial marina. So I think it's probably most appropriate that it remain in the waterfront commercial district,
I would not disagree.
right? I think the question then is, and we'll get into it when we get into uses. Of what uses do we want to continue there? And then if you feel, is there a reason that that building or a building that it replaces couldn't be 30 feet tall?
The real issue with that one would be it's not that wide of a lot, so it could be better than 60, you know, it'd be a mutual site to build on.
I think when you apply the setbacks, there might be some other existing non-conformities already present.
It's a real anomaly.
It very much is.
Right, so it sounds like because of the nature of its use, it could stay in the waterfront district, and I don't think we need special language for one property.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
Good.
All right, so the maximum height for on accessory building, you know, same as principal buildings. 30 feet, no averages.
Yep.
You're good with that? Maximum lot coverage. The old code says same as for the principal building. Am I good with that? Right? Good, you got another one.
Get harder, Bill.
Oh, yeah.
So we just put, you wanna go to waterfront one, which is gonna be eliminated, but what are we gonna do with it?
Yeah, we don't know what we're gonna do with it yet. I think what we do is define the dimensions for our various residential zones, then we see which one fits best for a particular area. So it could be-
Residential.
Yeah, it could be the ones.
Well, waterfront one, again, is commercial properties. And all of the limitations look to be the same as waterfront.
Waterfront one.
These are all boathouse, right?
Yeah, boathouse.
I think
It's not the Harbor Club.
No, it's actually north of,
The one right next to the beach.
yeah.
Yeah, right on Bay Street.
Are they? Oh, okay. Oh. Yeah, correct, my bad.
No, I'm just, we wanna deal with that now or later.
I think we set our dimensions, and we see what we like for a particular property. How about MHP, manufactured home park? And what I see here is the old code and repealed code used exactly the same
Yeah, they're
measurements.
identical.
They're identical.
I would see no reason to change any of them.
I agree.
Support.
Anybody in the public know any reason to change anything there?
Mobile homes. You've got manufactured homes, mobile.
Yeah.
What's the difference?
Page 7.
Yeah, what name do you like?
What's the difference between manufactured and mobile? Is that a term of art that we?
Yeah.
They run
One and the
wheels
same.
initially, the
Yeah,
mobile,
synonymous.
now manufactured are,
Not on wheels.
yeah, right. They have small wheels. They're only intended to be moved initially from factory to the site.
We wanna
After
keep it
that, they're
manufactured
not
home, not
mobile.
mobile, right?
It sounds like the most current.
Yeah.
Since nineteen
Description.
seventy-six, the best term now is manufactured home.
Let's go back to that. then.
John, do you, based on your experience, You agree, manufactured home?
I believe we changed it to mobile home park because there is state language for mobile home parks and they are licensed mobile home parks. As opposed to a manufactured home, which can be anyone, yeah.
You may be correct because the current term in the law is mobile home.
Okay.
And we're trying to change that, but we haven't changed it yet.
So for our use, it might be better to stay with the consistent definition with state.
Yeah.
And everything else. Okay, so the name will be mobile home park. And it looks like we're gonna keep everything the same.
Even though we all know they're not mobile.
Right. And there is there's a use in here that we'll talk about next, and that's to allow single family homes in the mobile home park, and that's a risk we identified with the current code, so we'll keep that in mind.
I hope you'll be aware that these homes are owned by the people who live in them, but they rent the land. It's like a park for owners, owned homes. Pre-built homes, but it's just a parking lot.
Got it. All right. I want to tackle the 3 business districts that are not central businesses.
That's B1, B2 and ROS.
ROS. One of the tasks we were gonna do is to see if all 3 could be combined into a new district. Mark's grimacing. Go ahead, Mark, tell us what you know.
I think that would be difficult, I thought, we talked about it before, and it seemed like, okay, it's a thing to go after, but when you look at the existing B1 and B2, the Lower Bluff, there's distinct differences between them, especially as you go down Third Street. It blends more towards the residential. It just has that feeling to me. I mean, I've been trying to get my mind around how to make it all B1, but I think they're really quite different animals. As I've looked at it more, but I'm just one person. But I sort of felt that where it's more residential, like going down Third Street, it feels like it almost needs to be its own animal. Maybe that relates more to what's going on top of the hill, where B1 is a little bit more intensive, more commercial oriented. Can't really see that going that far down Third Street right now. That's just my size. I've been looking at this for a while.
So are you just talking about B1 and B2?
Yeah, B1 and B2.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So that's just because, we've talked about those, trying to combine those together before.
Yeah.
And I'm having a harder time doing that, to be quite honest.
Are there no differences in the setbacks, et cetera, between B1 and B2?
The only thing I see, Chip, is the height. I see 35 feet in B1, 30 feet in B2.
And then, okay, we're not talking about uses, are we?
No,
No.
that's gonna be the problem.
Yeah, I guess, I probably jumped like out. But just, I was thinking about the uses and what could actually happen there. This on scale of it all.
Okay. So today we might say, yeah, those 2 can combine nicely, but when we get to uses, we might find something else.
Possibly, all right.
Mr. Chair, if I may,
Yeah.
I think the key with B1 and B2 is maybe that we focus more on the separation of the locations. Because right now we have in very close proximity to each other below the bluff, B1s and B2s, hit one, miss one, hit one, miss one. So I think, do you think that we could combine as far as below the bluff, B1 and B2s? And then obviously we have B2 above the bluff. I think it makes clear sense to separate whatever is going to be in the business below the bluff versus above the bluff. Not yet talking about the CBD. If you look at the map there, on Third Street, specifically near the corner of State and Third. We have some B2s and then we have a B1 thrown in there, and those are surrounded by more B2s and more B1s. That seems, at least at that location, it's very odd.
So that would argue towards combining B1 and B2
There.
Yeah.
at least below the bluff.
I could see, let's say we call it B1 below the bluff and then B2 above the bluff in the area around like D&W or the Harbor Market, I'm sorry. And then some of the other businesses that are right there.
Well, the only thing required to combine B1 and B2 below the bluff would be to just pick on height. And one of the districts today has 35, one has 30.
You have the bluff behind them, so 35 or 30 really doesn't matter because you're not blocking any views behind, so.
35, that's not good.
I'd suggest 35 because it's consistent with residential heights in that area.
Does anybody know anything different that would be a watch out on this? Okay, let's say it's 35.
And we're getting rid of stories.
Yeah, good question. Are we getting rid of storage too?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
So would this then become B1?
What should we call this? You want a working name, B1 below the bluff or something?
Oh, there is no B1.
B1 is below the bluff. All B1s are below the bluff now.
Oh, all right.
Correct.
Correct.
We're just talking about moving the B2 below the bluff to B1
Yes.
Yeah.
until we really look at the different uses for those two.
Yeah.
And stages of that.
Here.
And perhaps we could indicate the all the machinery on top of the roofs. Is that included in the 35 or is that in addition to the 35? It's about 10 feet of machinery. You have an elevator.
Thing there, John was proposing was 42 inches. And
I think if you're gonna take the B1 and B2 below the bluff, you should treat the height the same as you're doing the CBD. So you would have 35 feet plus the exceptions to put HVAC on top of the roof. I mean, it's very close. I don't know why you would want to discriminate across the street.
well, we haven't decided to CBD yet, though.
And there are residences in B1 also.
Yeah.
There's a very old document out there now. I think it was 2012-ish, maybe earlier, where there was where the downtown development group did kind of before we had our new master plan, they did kind of a downtown plan. And they called for stepping of roofs, and that as you got farther back towards the bluff, the heights would be higher.
So, just thinking out loud, is there a reason why we couldn't combine B1 with ROS? They both have the same complexion from a residential perspective. Some of the things that, I mean, I know we're not talking about what's what can be the uses, but in current B1 right now, we're talking offices, banking, retail. In ROS, we're talking beauty shops, single family and duplexes, retail floor shops. To me, they sound like the same thing. And if you drive the street, there's a lot of residential character up on Lake Street, and there's a lot of residential in the area that Mark was talking about at Third and State. So I don't know if you have any thoughts about that, but I think they're essentially functioning in the same capacity.
So ROS, and one thing that's you have to think about is parking. For some of the services, they require parking, it's not like parking down below the block.
Yeah. Well, no, I know, but a B1, you're talking, here's what, and I know we haven't decided what's gonna go in B1 right now, but currently in B1, anything that's in the central business district is fair game. plus offices, banks, retail. I mean, to me, they sound very similar.
The only issue I see there is lot coverage and setbacks are very different.
Because that speaks to the scale, you know, the ROS is much more residential scale wise. And B1 is much more dense and, you know, relative to more like the CBD.
Right.
You know, and so like CBD is the densest and then B1 is less dense. You get up into more residential areas and then the mass gets less, you get further away from your neighbor and there's more room.
But I totally take the point, but at that point in time, aren't you basically just defining what's there rather than what should be
I
there,
want to think about future.
right?
Just to comment, I understand your point, Bob, but I'm not quite there yet. Because if we're now to the point where below the bluff is going to be a homogeneous B1, then if I'm gonna use those businesses, I've got city parking available nearby. Whereas if I use ROS, I don't. So there may be some dimensional provisions that are gonna have to cause ROS to be different. That's what I'm thinking right now.
Yeah. But the parking is provided. I mean, I'm just trying to have, one of the things that we're trying to do with our this process is simplify. And if we're being, to me, it sounds pretty redundant. But if you guys don't think so, I mean, voice of one.
I think also once we kind of get into it and kind of weed it out, I mean, it could be something that we knock out.
Right, right.
So we definitely want to rule that out.
So I'm sorry, Barry, where are you coming up?
I'm just saying, once we kind of define everything and put everything in the right buckets, I think we may get to the point where we're gonna start dropping and combining things, so.
Right.
We can just table it for now.
They really are close. I'm looking at them side by side on the ROS chart. Really quite close.
Yeah, and when you look at, and I understand we aren't talking about uses right now, but when you look at the uses, it's even more compelling. But where's the one?
Let me give you some advice.
Yeah.
ROS, we find these in some communities. ROS was a zoning technique to allow office and personal services to sneak into residential areas. Okay, so if you look on Lake Street, you've got Benchmark, and a couple other ones that are in houses. I mean, it was just a way of allowing some low intensity office and businesses to sneak in to a residential area to keep the character. Now, the downside in some communities that have ROS is that you sometimes allow, depending on how the zoning is constructed, you allow somebody to build an addition in front of the house, which totally looks commercial. Okay?
Yeah.
Which then totally starts changing the character of the neighborhood. So you gotta be really careful about how an ROS district is used. So far in Harbor Springs, you haven't had that impact, but I can probably find some other ROS districts around the state where they've taken a house and then they put like a commercial building attached right to the front of it. And those don't look really great. And I don't think that's what you want. So there should be a difference in intensity between ROS and D1. They shouldn't be the same. So in fact, when you get to if you really take a look at the ROS district, you know, drive Lake Street, take a look, and maybe you want to actually reduce the number of uses that you allow in an ROS in order to protect the residential character of the neighborhood.
So I have had that thought as well, and I did exactly what you suggested a couple of times. And I'm almost wondering whether or not it should be fall into one of the residential districts. And then you just grandfather in the.
Yeah, and I don't want to, you know, we're trying to simplify everything, but what's happened over the last 10 years with home occupations and things like that, they've actually now have different tiers of home occupations. Where you have a home occupation where I have my internet business, or I'm a marketing representative, I can do all my stuff at home in my office.
Yeah.
Well, then you have some home occupations which actually have a few employees and then they have clients. That's kind of what you see in an ROS district. Okay, and so some communities are getting rid of, staying away from the ROS, and they just have a different tier of home occupation that can use a residential building, but it's got to go through a special approval process and a public hearing in order to really take a look at the design and what the impact is. So.
Makes sense. All right, in light of all that, where do we stand in terms of keep it as a separate district at this point?
ROS or?
Yeah, ROS, sorry.
Sounds like keep it as a
Separate,
separate.
for sure.
Yes.
All right.
And maybe work on it some more, what Don just said, I mean, I'd like to get ahead of some future problems that could actually come,
Yeah, that's a different issue.
Yeah, it's a different, we're working.
Right.
So for tonight, let's figure we're gonna keep ROS. Do you want the dimensions from the existing code? Existing code to carry forward then? All right, we're going to eliminate. Good with this thing on the table?
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, you want ROS? Are you talking about the ROS?
Yes, I guess I am, yes.
Okay, my suggestion on the ROS is, let's take a look at the 90% lot coverage. You may want to reduce that.
Great. You want to give us a recommendation next time?
Yeah, I will. I'll take a look at it. I'll go over and drive Lake Street again and really take a look at how the properties are used, but 90% inclusive of parking area means that 90% of the lot is pretty much going to be impervious. Okay, and that's getting to what you have in the downtown, so we may want to reduce that percentage.
Great, yeah, we didn't know that.
Can we change it to residential and just have those as conformed, and then going forward, if they would just go back into residential?
That's where.
I think a concern with that though, if I may, is the way that we have to look at non-conforming uses is different than a non-conforming building. And where the trouble comes in there is, let's say for the sake of discussion, a non-conforming building, as long as you keep it in good repair, you can maintain that building for quite a long time or forever, until such time as you need to tear the building down and replace it. Now it has to conform with zoning. Non-conforming use is a little bit different, where let's say that and we can see this in two locations in town. If we go to the corner of Main and Traverse, there was the old McGregor building that was there. That's an R2 district for residential use, but you had a commercial building at that site for a long period of time. Non-conforming use, once that use ceases to be used for a period of 1 year, you cannot reoccupy that building for that use anymore. So when the McGregor building ceased to have an occupant using it for commercial uses for a period of a year, and I believe it was up for sale. Now, when the new purchaser comes in, they can't go back to commercial use. So if we do that and change that to a residential neighborhood, we could be pushing that commercial out at a faster pace if there were ever vacancies. And I think that's something to be careful.
I think what I would suggest is, I don't know where this 90% came from. I think we should take a look at the ROS on Lake Street, take a look at the individual properties to see how they're developed. Use those metrics to reorganize the setbacks and the percentages. So what you have there now, if you like how that is, and really it's not bad the way that it looks, but you want to then craft the criteria basically to ensure it looks the same in the future without giving somebody greater latitude to impact the neighborhood.
Well, I like that, but that means keeping the ROS, keeping a separate district.
Yes.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
maybe change the percentages based on how it's actually been developed. This seems like it's an awful high percentage to me.
Then you want to give us a recommendation on that?
Let me take a look at it for the next meeting.
Take a drive?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so I'll restate what I think we decided. We decided, looks very positive to combine B1 and B2 business districts. Big changes, we made 35 feet maximum height. We're gonna keep ROS right now. And we're gonna take off from the measurements in the old code. And John is going to give us some recommendations about tuning those up in case we wanna really try to keep the way that looks today.
I thought we were gonna combine B1, B2 below the bluff, keep B2 above the bluff.
That's what I heard as well.
Yeah. Keep B2 above the, well, as its own.
Yeah,
More
its own
intense.
thing.
we're just combining B1, B2 below that. What we're talking about. Yeah, that's still, in my opinion, on the table when we look at the uses.
B2 above the bluff. Got it. And would we make the height of B2 above the bluff 35 feet as well? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. That's great. All right. CBD, how about it?
Question before you can see.
Yeah.
Mark made a good observation. I think it got bypassed. If you look at Third Street, and if you're gonna go 35 as opposed to 30, you're gonna have a house. There are a mix of homes and businesses. We could have houses that say 25 feet next to now potentially a new construction, then 35, then with another 5, 7 feet of mechanical on top of that. It's gonna make for a very odd Third Street.
No, that's not what I said.
I thought you were saying,
No, there's anything about 5 feet or 7
no,
feet on top.
you said you relooked at how Third Street looked and it was, and you kind of thought, hey, it's a mix of residential, it's.
And we're gonna talk about that use later on, that's gonna be the next time off, I guess.
And I'm not talking about the use, I'm just talking height.
B1 was
Sure,
already, 31 is 35.
It was already 35.
Yeah, it's already 35.
And I'm saying, do we want to, does it make sense to make that 30 to be consistent with the homes that are there?
What's the residential?
Maximum height of a residential, in all of our residential zones is 35.
Yeah.
35.
Oh, all right, well, thank you, so they don't. But then we were 30, is that what you're saying?
No.
B2 is 30.
Waterfront's 30 because of the views.
Yeah. Okay, all right, thank you.
Yeah, but any home in Harbor Springs could be 35 feet. Yeah, okay.
Well, I'm Patrick Kenny, for Bay Street. I'm curious if any of the structures in those zones, how tall they are, what the tallest is in those areas. I mean, if we're talking about having, residents and buildings that are much lower than the 35 feet or that is you're going to, I think that should be a consideration. So that new construction doesn't build much higher, for those existing buildings.
On Third Street.
Correct.
Okay, the current code is
I understand the current code.
35 feet. And, okay,
My question is, what is the actual current building height in that area, even though the code calls for something higher?
I don't think we know.
I think it's worth a question, because we're interpreting what these new buildings could be without considering the existing buildings in the height that they currently exist.
You have to look at American Legion and like Harbor Lake building, they're pretty tall.
Yeah.
I mean, it goes with the consistency of the notion of, the unspoken charm that we and trying to maintain what visibly is currently we like.
Okay. Do we have a service that measures the height of buildings? Or,
I have a laser measuring tool. I'm not gonna say that I'm the most precise, but I did at one point when we were discussing building heights in the CBD, go down and try and, to the best of my ability, zap some of the heights. So I could go and do that in that area. But
Let me give the planning commission counterpoint to that comment. We talk about private property rights. the Edward Jones building over there in Third Street's a one-story ranch. If I own that property and I wanted to sell it, and the person that wanted to buy it wanted to build a 35-foot building, you're actually taking away my property right, because now you said it's lower when everybody else has higher buildings. So you've denied me my property rights. So I don't think you can just indiscriminately say, well, let's check the height over here on this property and make that the height of the district, when you have other buildings that are already exceed that. So you really gotta be careful about that.
And the current code allows 35, and what's grown up there has been good and charming.
Okay, yeah.
So maybe we say it must be working.
And again, behind you, it's the bluff, the hill, so you're not blocking, so nobody's behind you.
At the beginning of the meeting, we talked about protecting property. I mean, that's kind of what we're talking about.
You know, Bill, if I may,
Yeah.
the comment from our colleague here, the point that he's missing is again, the nature of wanting to maintain what we have and the aesthetics of the charm. And so I get we don't want to take property rights away from people, but I think it's a legitimate question to ask. What is the existing height of those structures before we then determine, is that what we're going forward in the future? Now, I mean, there may be some grandfathering issues of existing building, but what about the empty lots that might be there?
I can measure those. Does this lead us to measure the heights of buildings on every street and set a height limit?
No, it doesn't, because we're speaking of a specific area that includes both residential and commercial. This is a unique area.
Is it?
The height's been that height for decades.
In the code.
Like in the code.
I would leave it 35.
You think we could set a fixed limit and feel pretty
Yeah, this is the
comfortable?
whole code there, because
Otherwise, it's just gonna personal.
Yeah, you're gonna have.
You can't have-
I respect the comment, but 35, again, is kind of our norm for residential, and the number's coming up a lot. And that seems to be the right answer. If somebody has built a building that's lower than that, okay, but the maximum height is 35, and that would be consistent with everything else that we've been talking about tonight.
Okay, I'm gonna think on that a bit, but for tonight's purposes, sounds like we're locked on 35 feet. Maximum height in that. In many other places. So speaking of that, in terms of the central business district. Anybody want to start us out with a proposed solution?
So the only difference between the existing and the proposed code was the number of stories, is that right?
And
the feet. So the existing code is 30 feet.
That's,
Is that right?
that's only half the story.
Okay.
Right,
And
and so here's the thing that I think needs to be made aware is, yes, if you look at the zoning code and you look at the central business district, it says the maximum height is 30 feet and 2 stories. However, we've got one of the largest blocks within the central business district that currently has a planned development option available to it that allows them to go up to 40 feet if they go through that process. So to simply state that the height limit in the CBD is 30 feet, I don't think is the full story. Because any of the properties on that block that met the criteria wanted to go through that process, they could build a building that's 40 feet tall under the current code.
So the block is from the bank to
It's the whole blanket, it's from the bank down to Cottage Company's new project, right?
That whole block.
That whole block. So, you know, to say that 30 feet is the maximum height, that's true, that's what that zoning district is. However, I think it's also worthwhile to note that we have a process for part of that district that allows taller. And my belief is that when we previously reviewed the revised height limit, It was to try and take that into consideration instead of saying this block can do this and this block can do that. It was to just say, let's just have one rule for the whole CBD. And that also tries to help eliminate the scenario where someone in a different block says, I'd like to be able to do what they can do across the street. And then wanting to come to the planning commission or city council or whoever and say, let's change the rules for me so that I can now go to the 40. And this way we can just put everybody on the same, plane. Or same playing field, I guess.
And we suggested that we put it all on the same as the plan development, like the 40 feet.
No, what we did is we something kind of in between. We basically came up with the idea of, we recognized that, if somebody was able to go like, let's say the full 40 feet right up to the property line, that would create a scenario where walking down Main Street makes you feel enclosed.
So does the plan development still trump everything? I mean, like, for example, Yummies, could they tear that building down and build a 40-foot building today?
Under the existing code, they'd need some more property. They wouldn't be able to just do that one site. But if somebody acquired Yummies and something next door, and they got enough property, then yes, they could, under the existing 2015 code, they could go through that process to 40 feet. Okay. So the idea that we came up with in the previous round, and we had a lot of good discussion about this at various meetings, was to allow 40 feet and 3 stories if that third story is set back from, because right now in the CBD, there are no setbacks. You can build right up to the lot line. And we said, well, if you want to go right to the lot line, only your first 2 floors can be 30 feet. If you want that third story and you want something there, that third story needs to be set back 8 feet from the property line. That way we don't get that enclosed feeling downtown with some of the existing buildings that we have. So it kind of keeps that open feel if some of the downtown businesses choose that they want to go higher. So we can create that ability, have one set height for the whole district. But if somebody wants to go for that third floor option, there's some setbacks. And I think we came up with that 8-foot measurement. Mark, I think you helped us with this. When you're on the sidewalk looking up, 8 feet would push it back far enough where as a pedestrian, you wouldn't see it.
Yeah, that would be like minimum. You see it from across the street, obviously, right down and you can see it. I think, was this the one where we also talked about, because right now they could have access to a roof deck or something like that, if they're just 2 stories. But if they're at the 3-story level, they do not have that option. They can't go up that additional. Is that what we've talked about?
Yeah, that's what's I think we had, at one point, we had created a diagram to kind of illustrate this, and we did show, but yes, if somebody wanted 2 stories with a rooftop deck, the total height of that, I think it would be like 30 feet or something. If they wanted, but we did, I think, have a diagram that showed that 8-foot gap of setback for the 3rd floor, there could be some type of a rooftop deck in that area with a small railing or something that met certain requirements. Something like that.
Anyway, the point is, what do we want now?
Yeah.
Yeah, what makes sense?
It's like 30 feet. I know that.
So every house in the city can be 35 feet tall.
Right, 35.
All over, yeah, okay. And do we?
If we go with that, does that still allow somebody to develop a 40-foot building on that one block?
That was through a plan development under the old zoning code. Okay. That would be your discretion if you want to create that plan development scenario in the code. We don't have to keep that section.
Under the current code, that's allowed.
Right, if we repeal
You say
the
old, it's current.
that would go away for that particular block, or would it?
We're revising the code, so it's what language do we want to
Okay, so that's
keep?
okay,
We can take it out.
we can take it out.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the way it's written today, it is taken out. Although plan development option could be, people could try it anywhere.
Right.
But if we pick a good height, I think they'd be less likely to try that. Okay, Carter.
Yeah, and I think in this, because of the discussion, this is the first time I've heard the PUD going all the way to the back. is that indicated on the zone? It doesn't, the zoning map doesn't show it that way. It shows it just over by
The zoning map doesn't show it at all.
Doesn't show that.
there was a version of the zoning map that showed that development and indicated it as a separate zoning district.
No, I believe if you look at the language in the zoning code, it's that block.
So it goes, okay, so that, I mean, this is a new part of the discussion that never came up in the whole last year and a half, so I guess we could look at it, but I believe that if you go back to the 2012 visioning effort, there was a desire expressed by the community at that point, which to some degree set the master plan, which was to keep, if we're going to elevate buildings, do it against the bluff, with the idea that if you're by the waterfront, you can see the bluff. And if you stand on the waterfront, if you go all the way out to the end of the docks, and even then some, and look up, you cannot see the bluff where the new buildings were built because they're too high. And so if you're thinking about the layout of the downtown, that sort of look up or look down was, that point was raised multiple times by people who are frustrated by this thing. So the answer being a 2-story, putting 40 stories across the entire thing would violate that entire principle, I think, sense.
So to speak. Did you say, or did you mean 40 feet?
Yes. I think somebody's drawn this line, so I don't know exactly, but the line is variable because it's sort of, can I be on the waterfront and see the bluff?
Yeah.
Or can I be on the bluff and see the waterfront? And so that, I don't know exactly what the measure is. I think 30 feet does it for Main to Bay.
Okay.
I mean, you could build 4 stories against, not that you want to do this, but you could do 4 stories against the bluff and it wouldn't bother.
Yeah.
The view, but it's an angle.
Okay. Yep. And yet we know there are some buildings downtown that are already taller than 30 feet. And then they have mechanical equipment on top.
But again, notably, if you kept 3 stories on Main Bay and maybe if everybody felt we really need to get height, do it closer against bluff and the town would look normal.
Got it.
Can I get a clarification? And Mark might be able to help here. Some of the discussion, as I understood it, revolves around elevator shafts. And is it necessary to discuss elevator shafts today, with most elevators that I'm familiar with in the 2 to 3 story range being pneumatic or bottom driven and don't have a rooftop shaft? And is there a scenario where you would have to have a top drive elevator in the 2 to 3 story range?
Well, they probably won't be top drive because it takes up so much space, vertically, as you know. But, it's still, the idea is that if you have an elevator going up to the rooftop. Then,
Oh, okay.
So you're already there.
Okay, so access.
So if you just eliminate the idea about the elevator, because you've got an elevator up there, you have more building up there too. And if you just take the elevator shaft out, you're okay. That's why we're saying if you go above the 40 feet or 35 feet, whatever that foot mark is, you go above that, it's not the number of stories, it's the number of feet. You can't go above that you don't have a right to use a rooftop deck with an elevator shaft, with an elevator access to it. I think that was what we talked about back in the day.
Okay.
Because it just sort of like eliminates the whole elevator thing. Yeah, if you do want to have access to your roof, then that's that top story. And if you're above a certain height, then you don't have a right to go above that with an elevator. It's capped. The number we're talking about, whatever it is, that's the top, period. Except for mechanicals, which we've discussed, and standard procedure with mechanicals on top of the buildings. But so in my mind, I think about it, if somebody wants to have, a nice rooftop deck where they're sort of like somewhere around the private 30-foot level or something like that, 2-story type of thing, and they have a nice rooftop deck on there. If they want to have built structure up there, And they aren't gonna have a rooftop deck, but unless you have like part building up there and then the rooftop deck. I think that's what spurred the idea, well, just to step that top story back. You know, just so it doesn't make it the Main Street a canyon. But if you look at Main Street now, you know, just with the current code that's there, that we have. You know, not a lot of people have taken advantage of that and put up new structures to the maximum height. It's like everything else, it's been there for a long time. It's just found a stable place where it likes to be. You know, but someone could come in and buy a series of properties down there and do what Jeff talked about earlier. So I'm all for getting away from that. Thank you.
Let me throw this out. Okay. Mark, and you can help me with this as an architect. In urban design, when I get the occasion to actually design a commercial hub, technically what we do is the first floor is around 14 to 15 feet high. Because you want that larger retail space with the larger windows. And I'm just throwing this out, 2 feet for your HVAC and mechanical, 9 above it for your second story, 2 above that for the HVAC, and 9 feet above that for the third story. That comes out to 37 feet.
Yeah, and then you need to have another 3 feet on top of that top story for the roof structure, insulation, and HVAC as
So
well.
you're talking 40 feet.
You're right at 40 feet.
You're right, that's kind of what we.
Yeah, that's pretty much there. I mean, you can lower the floor to ceiling heights and adjust that number downward. But you know.
But I think when you take 35 as the max in a commercial building in a downtown 3 stories.
Yeah.
And try to compress it to 35 feet. I don't think you're really architecturally ending up with a very desirable product myself.
Yeah, the scale is definitely down.
Yeah.
I mean, you're correct that, you know, the floor to ceiling heights are pretty standard when you walk into certain buildings. But the scale of, you know, Harbor Springs is somewhat small. You know, so I think you can get away with it, but your numbers are right, you know, it's maybe top out about 40 feet for that type of situation. But as we've seen though, it's been done. One very historical, the bank, then the most recent one. Probably here, which was its own special thing, otherwise that never would happen.
Mark, if you had to make a proposal to us.
Thanks, Bill.
Or a height, what would your preference?
It'd probably be like, you know, 35 or 40 feet. You know, I think it's either one of those would work, but I think the key is you have to have language so that you don't have a canyon effect and you step back from it, you know, to allow, you know, if you look at all those, you know, right next to the bike shop, you know, you have the buildings on the south side with the, you know, the multicolored little buildings and you drive underneath them to go to the resident on the water on Bay Street and stuff. That's pretty nicely done. And if you imagine that and that if there were another story there and a step back and had the same type of architectural approach to it, it would be cute. It'd be nice. The scale would be appropriate. Because it really does come down, in my opinion, to scale and materials, you know, the texture, just how does it read? Does it read the scale that we want it to be? To have charming and historic and all the stuff we love about Harbor Springs. So it's somewhere between 35 and 40 feet.
If we went with 35 and did not specify stories, what could you build?
Well, it's just like John was talking about, you have to reduce the floor to ceiling heights. Instead of 14, you'd have to go down for main level, you have to go down to like 10 or 12 and 2 feet. You know, for HVAC, and then maybe 8 foot instead of 9 foot, and then another 2 feet, and then another 8 foot, and then the 3 feet. And so you get somewhere between 35 and 40. So you just shrink it down, but it all comes down to matter of.
So 35 sounds like more realistically would be a 2-story building.
Realistically, but you could do 3.
You could do 3.
Yeah, that's the people's choice. How they
What
want
would
to
help
build it.
squish?
Be squished back.
Yeah, sounds like it would be more of a residential proportion of 35 feet and 3 stories.
Well, yeah, if you look at the uses, you know, I think maybe we're all in agreement about the main level, that's, you know, some type of commercial, professional type of thing, retail, whatever, and above it, you know, it's residential. And when we had to deal with the Rob Mossberg's project here, you know, fought hard for that top story. To increase the residential appeal of their units and everything. So I've mentioned something similar would happen like that. But the key is the language that would modulate how that massing works and pushing it back and when it's done well, I think probably all been in cities or in areas where that's done, if it's done well, you don't even know it. You don't know that's what's happened. 35 is squished, 40 works well. If you want to have a true 3-story option and give people that option of either having a roof deck or some level of 3rd-story living space, enclosed living space with a combination of outdoor decks and things like that. Which I think would be very appealing and bring more people to live downtown. So I probably lean towards 40 feet, but that's what I want to design. If I could make 35 work, but 40 would be much better.
Mr. Chairman, let me try a shot at it here, just based on our conversation. Is we would specify a choice that a developer could have. 35 feet maximum for a 2-story, or 40 feet for a 3-story, where the 3rd story has this, call it 8 feet setback. Push back. So, and the reason I state it that way is I don't want someone to build a 40-foot 2-story wall. And so they can do 2 or 3 stories and all that stuff, but there's a max dimension for either case. And then the additional condition of the 3rd story has to be a pushback or setback. Does that make sense?
I think that's what we had in the proposed code.
That's pretty much exactly what we had before. I think. Yeah, it might have been 42, but I know that it's basically we set the front height right at the road at whatever we had figured out a 2-story building would be, somewhere between 30 and 35. And then that 3rd story had to be set back 8 feet.
Yeah, during our deliberations on that, I think we actually had Mark. He was doodling
Did the stack
on the stacking to show how you'd articulate that 3rd floor back. In order to have that view, maintain that view, that reduce that canyon effect.
I've got a crazy idea in terms of reducing the canyon effect. Could we say the setbacks have to be where the existing setbacks are in the buildings? In other words, where like Monogram Goods is, it's back. You can't go towards the street from there on any new building there. I don't know if it's legal or I don't know anything about it, but I'm trying to reduce the canyon effect as well.
Well, the canyon effect is reduced, is managed by the height. I don't have my computer, so I can't take a look at the canyon effect is basically a function of the width of the street from building face to building face. And then there's a certain dimension of height that you don't want to go over that because that creates the canyon effect. But I don't know offhand what that proportion is. But there is from a design point of view, there is a ratio of, if you take the width from building to building across the street, there is a ratio that says if you go above that, then you're going to have a canyon effect. And, if we want to talk about this at the next meeting, I'll take a look at what those ratios are. But that's how they determine the height in some downtowns to prevent the canyon effect, is based on the width of the street. Then based on the width, there's a proportion of vertical. So you have that angle that Mark is talking about. So basically, the wider the street, the taller the building. So there is a kind of like a magic sweet spot that you can do. And we could apply it down here to really figure out what that height could be. But that's just based on good architectural design.
So let me just take your temperature. Are you open to a height above 35 feet with some conditions or tricks, or are we just gonna say 35 feet is the maximum height? Live with it, design around it.
That's my view.
Also, Bill, just to throw this out, one last thing. So the style of some of these buildings from 100 years ago is to have like a higher facade in the front. Some of them are even fake, or most of them are fake, but that's sort of the style. So by pushing that back, we're kind of eliminating the charm and the history of Harbor Springs as well.
Yeah.
If you couldn't have a facade.
Correct.
I like Kenny's idea. I think that was a good shot at it. You know, just where you create a limit for the two-story reality, and there's a three-story reality, there's another limit, but it comes with conditions.
Well, it's actually a little better than that, isn't it, Mark? Because you can still do with 3 stories and 35 feet. It's just not comfortable. So I don't know that you have to specify. If 2 stories at 35 and 3 stories at 40, you could just say you can build up to 35 feet tall. If you want to build up to 40 feet tall, you got to push it back 8 feet.
The whole building or just the top floor?
Just the top floor. So I guess it gives you a little bit more flexibility than what you.
That gets done what I was looking for.
Yeah.
Karen.
Excuse me, Karen Oldfield. So I'm super surprised, that we're sitting around talking about, allowing the 3-story downtown area. When, we were working on the zoning before, the downstate, illustrations of filling in our downtown with more residents, more businesses. They always said that when you had a 3-story downtown, you sort of had a 24/7, nightlife and energy level. You have, because you filled these spaces with all these people. And so in the vision plans and in the surveys that we've all seen, everybody loved the height of the city just the way it was. And so by allowing this higher option, I think that we're going to change a character that maybe we're not thinking about in the biggest picture. So I'd like you to consider that, please.
Mr. Chair. Yeah. Maybe I'm looking at this photograph on historically, but historically, you already have a 3-story building in the downtown. Actually, this is probably 40 feet high because it's got the parapet.
43 feet high, actually.
43?
Yep.
Yeah, so you already, historically, there was always 3 stories in the downtown. This building here, it goes to what Barry says. This is the 1st story, which is 15 feet with your cornice. This is the 2nd story, but behind it is a regular ridge roof. And what they did is, in order to give it the mass, they extended the facade up higher with a fake cornice to cover that roof. So there's historically, if you're looking at historic charm, you already had 3 stories in the downtown area. So I don't know what this issue is about just having 2 stories in your downtown when historically you had 3 stories. And you have the width that I talk about from building line to building line. This is the canyon effect. If these buildings were higher, this would be a canyon. But this is a pretty decent dimension between these buildings and the width here. That's what gives you that degree of intimacy and why people like to walk a downtown, because it has that feeling to it. But if you lower your downtown with that width of a street, it's going to give you a whole different character than what historically what the downtown was like. So don't just arbitrarily pick a number because you think it's cool. Pick the number because it's got context in terms of what your design's going to be for your downtown area. So I would say take a look at it, walk it, and really take a feel for what the downtown is before you pick that number, because that number could change the character of your downtown. And since there's this driving force for historical development patterns, there's your historical development pattern right there. So.
All right, Garen.
I like John's comments, I think.
But could I ask this, and maybe Jeff, you know this, what is the height, including the deck of the new cottage company building?
I think that including the rooftop access, I believe that's 49 feet.
Okay, most people I've talked to think that the massing on that building is just too big for our town. So I think that's what we have to be cautious of, these setbacks and rooftop decks, because they have a rooftop deck. And if they didn't have a rooftop deck, personally, it's still very big. So be cautious. I get that we have a bank building that's historic, that is very large, and that's great. It's the anomaly there. But to make everything like the new cottage company, I'm concerned, even if it's a little bit less. I think it's concerning.
Well, and I think that was something that came up before, is, you know, that building is 3 stories plus rooftop deck. And we said that that's probably too much, so even in before, we said, let's scale that back, you can go 2 stories with rooftop deck or 3 stories, but you can't have 3 stories and a rooftop deck, is kind of what we were leaning towards before.
You wanna pick on this one?
We can, sounds like we.
Yeah, I think, well, it's just spend more, downtown all the time anyway, but really think about it a little bit more, and if John could look at the canyon effect ratios and all that kind of stuff. That'd be good to know, but I mean, there are some buildings down there, like, it's just, simple gable roof, it's just on the other side of Gurney's there, I don't know the name of it, but that's a really tall building. With the gable roof on it, it's an upper level story, and it's almost like, that's, in that one, and I think someday, Gurney's is probably gonna change, something's gonna happen there. Those things are gonna happen, but it's gonna happen incrementally, nobody's gonna come in and just buy 5 properties and do a cottage company thing. I don't think that's gonna happen. But I do think, but by getting the DD, what's the overlay district that's there, we've been talking about? That allowed the kind of
Plan development, or the plan unit development.
Yes.
thing. I really think we gotta do it. That's a little bit scary.
Yeah.
I'm just struggling trying to figure out, size, setbacks, everything to try to maintain the charm of our downtown area are the insets and the inserts and the funkiness of it. And, I like that.
We could try to.
So I don't know how we, I don't know how we put funky in the.
Well, one of the things that we did talk about at some point, and I think it's in there about how to articulate the sidewalk scape as far as the administration of the buildings and how it needs to be broken up. We have some controls in there now for that.
Right.
And I do think that, I sort of like your idea about maybe, if you're at a certain height, you've got to step back. You break the line of buildings, and you make something a little like mini courtyard kind of thing or something like that. I like that idea. I think that's sort of fun.
I don't know how you legislate that, but.
Yeah, well, you could say like every foot above this, you got, your front setback instead of being 0 is 6 inches of 2-to-1 ratio or something, just, but whatever, I think we should base it on actual measurements and things that have been stated and are known that John can help us with. So I sort of like the idea of making it a little more irregular, and that would help, the quaintness, charm.
Right.
I agree with you.
Well, Mark, would you like to work with John to flesh this out a little bit more and?
Yeah, I'll get with Mark. Yeah.
See what you guys want to
Bring
bring
them
back
back in next week.
Great. All right, let's talk about what we want to do yet tonight. And what we might want to put on. There's a couple, everybody's here to hear about the residential districts, and we haven't even got to them. We thought we were going to knock off the easy ones first. Any time to do that. We're coming up on 3 hours. I can go longer, might need a break, but I can go longer if you want to. Or should we power through a couple of miscellaneous ones before we get to the residential ones and hold that for the next meeting?
I'd rather hit residential another time.
It's important, it's really important. How about some input from that side of the table?
Yeah, I think so.
Wake us up.
Yeah. What did you have in mind in terms of,
Yeah, we could look at, two-family.
Mhm.
yeah, that's pretty straightforward.
We did not have it in the repeal code, but we do have it today. We decided we're gonna go forward with it. Do you see any reason to change anything that's in the current code? In that district?
No,
I don't. If I could bring up a point. And this is the first time we're seeing it in the districts we've looked at. It does reoccur in the other residential districts. And this is to the point that Gordon Andrews brought up earlier, and that's a part of our side yard setback. We have a flat setback number of 12 feet in R2, but then we also say, or 12% of the lot width. The full language is whichever is greater. And Gordon is not the only property owner that has suffered from this, causing issues. This has come up a couple of times in property owners that have had, lots that are excessively wide, in their location of where they would choose to place their home. Or in Gordon's example, where he wanted to combine his lot to be able to do something and it causing an issue. I don't know. I think the idea with that 12% is that with larger lots, it does naturally tend to push homes to be more in line with the middle of the lot as opposed to one side or the other. However, when you have situations where lots are large enough to be really probably two separate lots, it creates a situation where you're forcing a property owner to build in the middle, thus preventing them from saving a portion to be able to be split off later. So I would like you guys to at least have the discussion of whether or not you want to keep that 12% rule, or if you think that you're comfortable getting rid of it.
well, the simple solution there would be to just say 12 feet and get rid of the 12% rule. And I don't think that would be a bad solution. I mean, side setbacks in Harbor Springs are pretty narrow. I'm sure there are many houses where that setback is even less than that. As a matter of fact, there was one next to you, wasn't there?
They got a variance.
Yeah.
So we approved it.
Yeah.
Yeah, my thought, if 12 feet's good enough, if it's a narrower lot or a lot where you might want to split, then why does it have to be not good enough for a larger lot?
Yeah, that's weird. It's a weird unintended consequence, I think, of that. All right, do we right now favor getting rid of the percent aspect to side setbacks?
I'd be good with it.
Right. So then,
Can I bring up another point?
yes, Jeff.
So it's not shown here because initially in our previous version of the new codes, we didn't have R2, but in a residential districts, we did talk about modifying the front yard setback to at least provide the option of having an average of the homes next to you. I think this is something that we should again have a conversation about. Many property owners that had neighbors that were excessively close to the street came to the zoning board of appeals for variance requests in order to apply for variance to have their home be similarly close to the street as their neighbors. One thing I do think we got wrong in the previous version was we simply just stated that it would be the average of the homes on the block or within a reasonable distance of you. I do think we need to relook at that language because we did find in a couple instances where the average actually created an excessively large setback. So I think that we should recognize the standard that the zoning board of appeals came up with in providing an opportunity to average homes around you if they're already closer to the street than what the regular setback would allow. So my thought would be to provide the option to a property owner so that they could either utilize a standard setback, or if they have neighbors that are excessively close, to be able to engage in that averaging so that they could similarly be close, saving that property owner the necessity of going to the zoning board of appeals, increasing their cost and time when the ZBA has already pretty much established that standard. And we could come up with easy wording to achieve that if you guys are comfortable with that.
Let me restate that. Under that approach, a front setback would be a fixed amount or an average of nearby homes, and it's the owner's choice. Correct. About what to go with. So if you don't want to spend the money to measure your neighbor's homes, you'd say 25 feet or 15 feet or whatever is good enough for me. We just run with that.
Let me try something. I think what you said, correct me if I'm wrong, is it would be a set number or the average of the homes in nearby area, whichever is less. Would that be the standard?
Yeah, let's use an example. Let's use the north side of let's use the north side of Third Street in the proximity to Judd. That is an R2 district right now. And those homes historically, because of their close proximity to the bluff behind them, have come to the zoning board of appeals for front yard variances to be closer to the street. So I would say realistically in that neighborhood, the average is probably where the current setback is 25 feet. The average of the neighbors in that area is probably somewhere around 5 to 10 maybe. So if someone was willing to go through the extra effort in establishing what the average is for the homes around them, they would have the option of going with the average to allow them to be closer so that they fit in more with the scale of what their neighbors are already doing. Or if they choose to not go through the extra process, they could just use the 25-foot standard setback. And it would be the option to them of which they would like to do. We also see this, this happens frequently on Pine Street as well as another area that we saw this happen.
Mr. Chairman, that whichever is less language would give that owner some additional freedom to build, but they would never build anything that would be out of character of the surrounding area.
Correct.
So to be the devil's advocate, and I certainly understand the issue with people at Third and Judd, but when you start doing averages, that means, you know, when houses start moving forward, then the averages start moving forward, right? And so houses will typically get closer to the street over time.
Only if you allow them to be closer than the average. If you establish and they measure that the average is.
The average would include the ones that are set back further.
Yeah.
And so then, you know, all of a sudden, if that house moves up, then the average is up closer to the street. It's just that, you know, the law of averages. So, I'm not saying I'm guessing, I'm just saying that's something we should think about when you start averaging.
We could then also include language that says never to be less than a number, 5 feet, you know, or something.
And is that a problem? What's the issue with the houses being closer to the street?
Just aesthetic.
I think it's an aesthetics thing, but realistically, the aesthetic has been all of these other homes are already closer to the street than what current rules will let me do. So they're up here and I'm building a new house and I'm forced to be back here. And so there've been many of our zoning board of appeals cases in the last 10 years have been requests to be within reasonable proximity of the neighbors. And they've historically, based on that standard, granted those variances. So I think it's appropriate that since the ZBA has kind of set a standard, that we should at least look at that for potential to and just include it in the code now.
Well, I take Chip's point. I think it makes sense. I do think that the evolutionary process would take 50, 70, 80 years for that to have a market effect on the complexion of the city. All that said, simple solution would be to do what Jeff just suggested and say, okay, but never closer than 5 feet or whatever the right amount is. And that way you you give more latitude to the property owner, but you ensure that you don't have a compromised aesthetic.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I don't want to get too much into the weeds here, but since you guys are always looking at dimensions. If you take a look at your zoning map, the R2 that's over by, on north side of, Third Street, between Bluff and Third. Take a look at that area and also take a look at the R2 district that's south of Main between Zoll and Judd. The lot sizes are actually smaller in many cases than they are in the R1C. So your requirement is for a two-family, you have to have a 100-foot wide lot and 10,000 square feet. I would say a significant number of the lots that are in the R2 district are non-conforming. Because they don't match up with the, with the code.
You know, one of our key things that we talked about for duplexes possibly is they have to meet exactly the same specs as a single family house in terms of height and width and, you know, and they have to be fit in the exact box that a single family home has to fit in. So wouldn't they have the same, wouldn't it make sense to have the same specs in terms of dimensions? For whatever we settle on for, whatever our most common resident, single family. You know. We don't know what that is yet. Okay.
Just pointing it out.
Yeah, I'm glad you did.
That your R2 district doesn't even match up dimensionally with the lots.
Okay, so I'm gonna write, it's all right with you all, I'm gonna write hold until we kind of define our main residential. Okay. Then, there would be one more we could look at to get. out of the way.
Bill,
Yes,
just one thing on the R2 up there next to the mobile home park. Is there some way that we can fix that? So if someone can come along and, do some renovation there. Because that's not really set up as a duplex system. More multifamily.
yeah, sure is.
And that was done through, I believe, some type of plan development process back in the late eighties or early nineties.
Get some clarification.
Yes.
So with what we're trying to do, combine the two lots, I have an 8-foot side setback for it. So with what you're saying, does that mean that instead of taking away the percentage, that it's just gonna be set at 12 feet? So I still.
No, this is not your
different
district yet,
Oh,
This is
we're
a
not-
different district with a different side yard setback.
but we just arrived at a principle that I think you're gonna be happy with. And I'll get to your, yeah.
Good question about that.
Yeah, that does not seem right for R2.
Right.
Seems like
Multifamily.
multifamily. Okay, great, thank you, Karen.
So we're thinking of just rezoning that to the RM district.
Let's go to the RM district, and that could be the last one that we have to do tonight. And the existing code and the repealed code were similar in a lot of ways, but different too. And John, can you remind us of what the thinking was and lowering the minimum lot width, changing some of the other specs? John's remembering.
I'm trying to remember.
I know. I think the idea was, let's give more flexibility to somebody that wants to build in the RM district. We have such a little of it, you know, such little space that, in fact, we don't even know of any that's really available. But if something were to change, they could make a more flexible design option.
The standards for under the repealed code, 52 feet wide, the 64 square feet were the same as the single family district. That's what we did to give them the flexibility.
And we also have the percent on the side setback. Are we clear to remove the percent on that? Yeah. No. What's your pleasure on this one?
The current lot minimum width is 54 feet, is that correct?
100 feet.
100.
I'm, for single residential.
65.
65. So I'm looking at kind of the macro issue where the repealed code reduced the width of a lot possible within the city to 52 feet from what used to be 65.
Yeah, we used. Jeff. I think it's the Crandall subdivision is the smallest lots in the city, and those were 52 by 135, I think.
52.8 by 132.
Okay, close, but that's what we used as the standard size.
Crandall area is behind Harbor Market. Is that?
No, the Southern and Crandall subdivision is below the.
Oh, yeah.
It's Third Street, Fourth Street.
Yeah. So we use that as, that was the historic smallest lot. And then, so we use that as the pattern for single family. Rather than the 65, because we didn't know where the 65 was.
I see. Thank you.
We really are talking about a big area here, are we?
No.
The only concern that I think I would have is the RM is a district where higher density is appropriate. And so I do think that it may be, we should think about reducing those setbacks. Because obviously if it's a small lot, like 52 feet wide, then they're probably only gonna fit a single family home or a duplex. But if it is a larger lot, let's, like, for instance, the one of the apartment building downtown, Hillside Apartments. If we change the setback, then that would also be the setback for a larger project. And would we be comfortable with a larger project like that being that close to a property line? I think in those larger scale projects, that might be getting pretty close to some property lines and some neighbors in their privacy.
And there's no vacant RM properties.
I don't believe there are.
Everything's built already. Everything's pretty new. Hillside, it's just a few years old. It's not gonna be replaced. Cottage Company. And those condos there, and then the like on Artesian Street, that's all built. So maybe
you might be safe to. I just thought that might be something to think about.
Set it really wherever we think makes sense.
I don't remember, how did we come up with that 860 square feet minimum size?
Oh, that was just a dimension for the smallest dwelling unit.
That's the leftover minimum size from the previous zone.
Okay.
But to Jeff's point, if someone wanted to tear down Hillside and expand it, they could move the building to within 8 feet of the perimeter of the lot. Is that correct?
Well, that's on their side yard setback.
Yes, side yard.
And they do have, they redid those front buildings. There is that back building that I don't know how old that one is, but it is an older one.
And they have to deal with the parking, so they're gonna have that parking lot that's gonna divide a.
That building's from 1998.
Is that when it was built? Well, John just made a good point. Maybe this is the one district where we do keep the percentage of the lot width. So that on these larger parcels, you have the greater setback.
That would produce.
Okay.
That's a good point.
Somebody make us an offer.
One quick question about the 864, is that left over from the existing code, or was that Emmett County's kind of lowest?
No, Emmett County's is like 360 or something, right? It's, they're, I think Emmett County is 500 for a regular, but then 360 for an ADU, right? Yeah, the 864 is just something left over from our old.
Gotcha.
John, do you want to give us a recommendation?
Well, you know,
Get us off to.
you don't really have that many areas left to redevelop for multifamily. I think the what we had scripted out for the repealed code made sense in terms of the lot width, the percentage of lot coverage and the minimum size. I mean, because we're still holding the 864 as the minimum floor area that's from the current code, so you're gonna end up with the same size of apartments. But like you had mentioned, Bill, there's not many RMs that are available in the community, so.
Karen.
So when we were canvassing, we spent a lot of time over at the apartment buildings, and they're really nice. They're 4-unit apartments. They could be 2 stories.
Which ones are these?
Windermere Pines?
Windermere Pines.
Okay.
Lots of space in between the units. Everyone's really happy there. They've been there a long time. You could add to them, but it might be a place that you can use as an example.
So that might argue for some smaller lot sizes or smaller setbacks to give them more flexibility.
If we reduce the floor area a wee bit, that also will increase what could be done with set buildable envelope. If you reduced it from 864 square feet to the size of a two-car garage, which is 576 square feet, or any other number you want to choose, that gives you more options about how you develop the property without changing, setbacks and all that kind of stuff. Create more options.
Okay.
That's another way to look at it.
I feel like we need more apartments. I feel like we need more rental options.
Well, it's people want places to live.
Bill, what about the front setback to 15 feet? That seems pretty far. If you're trying to put in multiple. Is it the average of other buildings on the same side of the street are 15 feet? On the RM or R2, we don't even have that down on, Judd and Third. Those are really close. So why does it have to be 15? This seems far if you're trying to, you have a smaller lot. You're trying to have a few homes in there. Like the apartments.
That's what I was just talking about earlier, is it's 15 or the average, whichever is less.
There were homes on that, because like, let's say where RM or Hillside is, they don't really have homes that are for the average. What would you use there? Figure that setback in the front, that front, the new building, the home next to it is way back.
Well, then they would use the 15.
Just a 15.
It does seem the average might be a little redundant, as the way these are broken up, mostly you're gonna be looking at other zoning districts for your comparatives.
You want to remove the average from this one, or?
Well, I'm just thinking, would you want to compare the average to, a different zoning district? I'm not sure that makes sense.
Okay, I think we're stalled.
Yeah.
And, yeah, so, Dan and Jeff, would you like to bring us a recommendation on this one? To get us off.
We can at the next meeting.
Pardon me?
We can at the next meeting.
And then we can talk about it. All right. Thank you. Planning Commission, thank you, public, thank you, people on Zoom. That was a long one. And, we made good progress. What we have to do now is figure out when we're gonna meet again. First question is, do we want to meet twice in July?
No.
Oh.
Well, we do have two site plans that have been submitted for review in July.
Regular business,
Regular business.
regular people's business. Sorry, Reed.
So the,
Reed is one of them.
Yeah. Okay. Wait a minute, who said we don't want to meet twice in July?
I didn't.
Probably be gone in the middle of the month anyway. I'm okay.
Conceptually, okay.
Yeah.
All right, here's, I'm gonna throw out an idea. You wanna meet next week? Next Thursday night? and continue this?
Nothing of the fleet, I think.
Yeah. Oh,
Blessing the fleet.
oh. Well, whose boat can we meet on? That takes us to the third. That's a problem.
Yeah. You can't get.
That'd be very good.
Well, that's a good point. Chip does, it have to be Thursdays. Well, I think we would love to finish dimensions ASAP. Move into uses in July. How much energy do we have? What can we do?
What's everybody doing tomorrow?
Yeah. We couldn't actually do that, could we?
No, no,
You
No, no.
notice,
You need to notice the meeting.
so it'd have to be Saturday.
What about, how much notice is it actually?
18 hours.
18 hours.
what about, you know, to Chip's point, what about like the 30th and the 1st?
30th is city council.
Oh, yeah.
No. No.
No.
First and third Monday for city council, so the 30th is open.
Special meeting on the July.
Well. How about the 30th?
I may not be able to make it.
How about the 25th? Wednesday, next Wednesday.
I can't do
No.
it.
I can't do that.
No.
Loser.
I'm just struggling, and I think the response we're getting here is summer's very short for us.
Yeah.
It's part of the,
There's been a lot of meetings.
it's been a lot of meetings. We signed up for one a month, maybe.
That's right. See where you're going.
Yeah. But we don't get a lot of time to enjoy the outdoors here. I think trying to cram too much in here in this short summer period is gonna be challenging for a lot of you.
Yeah, I've seen that. The hitch is, we're almost there on dimensions. We've got momentum, we remember what we just decided tonight. There could be some advantages to just getting that done somehow, some night. What about, who could make it on the 30th that we decided to gut it out?
I can make it.
Mark cannot make.
No.
Chip?
Probably cannot make it.
Okay, the 30th does not work. All right then. Where does that leave us?
17.
We should be able to get through on the 17th, the rest of the districts, the dimensions.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and our special land use.
What if we did the 31st of July. So there'd be 2 meetings. Essentially in July.
That would still give us 2 weeks between those meetings to, yeah.
Doesn't get it as soon as you want, Mr. Chairman, but at least it gets us another extra meeting if it's possible.
That does help fill the gap because there's several weeks then before the August 21st meeting. So it would fill in some of that.
How do people feel about the 31st?
Of July.
Well, I could do it.
Would you be happy with this?
Yes. It doesn't solve the short summer challenge I have. We also have a lot of work to do, so.
Kenny?
I'm good for the 31st and I'll pray for rain.
All right. All right, sounds like we're on for the 31st and the 17th. And all this will be continued. We'll bring back updated versions of what we think we decided. And you guys can know. All right, thanks, everybody. Meeting's adjourned.
Thank you.
Bye.